can. And as usual, answers to all the questions will be posted on our website. Kev, if we could move to the next slide, please. So to kick off, I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone attending, and a special thanks to our guest speakers for taking the time to share their knowledge and their expertise with us today. We do have a full and very exciting agenda, but let's take a moment to reflect on how we got here. We know in 2016, the UK voted to leave the EU. How we left or whether we left was contested up until Boris Johnson succeeded Theresa May as Prime Minister in July 2009. Boris Johnson was eventually able to get his withdrawal bill through Parliament, and we left the EU at the end of January this year. Our exit led us into an 11-month transition period, which has kept us in the EU customs union and which keeps us in the EU customs union and single market until the end of the year. And in the midst of all this preparation, an unprecedented global pandemic swept across the globe, forcing us into a lockdown, which understandably impeded HMRC's plans and preparations. The result is a 6-month implementation period between the UK and between the UK leaving the EU customs union and the imposition of full border controls on the 1st of July. Looking at that picture, I mean, love him or loathe him, I think poor old Mr. Johnson has had a torrid time. Kev, if I could have the agenda, the next slide, please. Our agenda has therefore been crafted around the bits that are really worrying us all in the run-up to our exit from the European Union. The Northern Ireland Protocol and how we handle trade between GB and Northern Ireland and the rest of the world has been a real concern for us all. ACITA are lucky to have Alex Vince from HMRC here to talk to us both about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the recently announced Trader Support Services initiative. After Alex has given us a government perspective, we've got Shanker, Singham and Frank from the providers of TSS to give us an exclusive, you heard it first at ACITA, overview of what TSS is going to do and not going to do. Another area of concern for all of us is whether GVS will be delivered in time and how it actually works. Andrew from HMRC will be taking us through HMRC's progress and providing us with the assurances that we are all seeking. I mean, CFSP is also seen as critically important in meeting the additional declaration requirement after we've left the European Union, especially during the implementation period. And Teresa from HMRC will be providing us with an update and an overview. And last but not least, no ACITA national would be complete without a European perspective. And our favorite European legal expert, Yves Melin, will be updating us on the progress or lack thereof on the EU trade negotiations. And I am really looking for that. So thank you all and welcome. I'd like to now hand over to our first guest speaker. Alex, I saw a small picture of you on the screen as we started. So over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on the call. And I do apologise in advance if the connection gets slightly rickety at the moment, but we do our best in these circumstances. So yes, I don't have a visual presentation to go through today, but I wanted to give you guys all an update on where we were with the Northern Ireland Protocol, including some references to the Trader Support Service. But because I've got colleagues from the Trader Support Service here on the call immediately following me, I'm not going to go too in depth with how it will work. I'll reference it, but then I'll allow them to fill in the details in their own segment. So first off, what I'd like to do in this session is a very quick introduction to what the Northern Ireland Protocol is. I'm sure you all are aware of it in some good capacity, but it's always good to start with a start. Then I would like to go through a current overview of all the major movements under the protocol. And then by going through these movements, then we will identify kind of a couple of the other key topics that I'm sure that you're all eager to explore. And then when I'm going through the movements, I will then give an update on the current happenings within HMRC when it comes to the development of the Northern Ireland Protocol in the sections where they're kind of relevant. So we'll make sure that we kind of keep focus through that way. So that will be basically how I run my presentation, but I'm very keen to take questions and feedback away afterwards and answer as many as I can during this half an hour or so. So first off, the Northern Ireland Protocol. So the Northern Ireland Protocol has been designed as a practical solution to avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland, whatever the trading arrangements are between the UK and the EU. So I know we're all watching the news and we're seeing negotiations unfold, but it's important to kind of draw out that regardless of the future trading relationship, the work being done on the Northern Ireland Protocol and a number of the things agreed through it will be relevant, be that with there being a full trade agreement with no deal, whatever the final situation is, the work being done on the NIP will still have relevance, as there are still a very particular set of challenges, regardless of the future trading relationship, that the Northern Ireland Protocol will be there to help resolve. Now, I think we had reference to the staged introductions of controls at the end of the transition period, with full controls coming in at the 1st of July. I just want to kind of separate those from the conversation we're about to have about the Northern Ireland Protocol. Staged introduction of controls is about GB to EU movements. When it comes to movements through Northern Ireland, that is a separate thing entirely. So there will not be the same staged introduction of controls. And following the Northern Ireland Protocol, the final agreements will be in place from the 1st of January onwards. So particularly when it comes to Northern Ireland, readiness for the 1st of January is a key area to focus on, as we will not have the same 6th-month kind of phased period of introductions of customs processes that you're seeing in the GB to EU movements. So yes, in the Northern Ireland Protocol, the government has committed to delivering unfettered access for NI producers for the whole UK market. We've committed to ensure that there are no tariffs on goods remaining within the UK customs territory, and we've committed to give effect to obligations without the need for any new customs infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and guarantee that Northern Ireland businesses will benefit from the lower tariffs we deliver through our new free trade agreements with third countries. So those are some of the UK government's commitments that we're aiming to deliver in through the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's two major pieces of guidance that the UK government has released on the Northern Ireland Protocol so far. The first is on the 20th of May, when we released the Northern Ireland Protocol Command Paper, which really sets out the UK government's position on a number of issues within the protocol. So that really helps give an idea of where we are headed and where we're striving to get to in negotiations. The second piece of guidance is the Northern Ireland Business Guidance, released on 7th of August, and this gets more into the detail of how movements are likely to work, but we are expecting there to be another substantial update to this business guidance in October to help give further clarity on how movements are going to work after the end of the transition period. So I do encourage your members to all have a look through these two pieces of guidance to kind of give the full comprehensive view, even though I'll try and hit the high notes in the next kind of half an hour or so. So what is the Northern Ireland Protocol? It is a commitment that there will be no new checks or controls on the land border between NI and the Republic of Ireland. So NI applies UCC, EU goods regulations, and corresponding import controls. But the Northern Ireland does leave the EU alongside the rest of the UK, so it still remains part of the UK's single customs territory and is included in UK trade policy and free trade agreements going forward. So the first kind of major move that I'd like to pay attention to is Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland. So if we're looking to move goods between the two sides of the island of Ireland, we are committing in the Northern Ireland Protocol for there to be no hard border, no physical infrastructure, no checks or processes, and no customs duties or tariffs. Northern Ireland forms a single regulatory zone with the island and applies the Union Customs Code. This means that goods that can move from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland and through that to the EU without any infrastructure, checks or processes. So in essence, if it's in free circulation in Northern Ireland, it is in free circulation with the Republic of Ireland, and it is in free circulation within the EU. The Northern Ireland Protocol enables tariffs to be collected on goods at risk of entering the EU single market at ports of entry, rather than at the land border, that is the legal boundary between the UK and the EU's customs territories. It also respects the pre-existing status accepted by all parties of the island of Ireland as a single epidemiological unit for food and animal health purposes, and provides a wider regulatory alignment on industrial goods on the basis of democratic consent. So that is the relationship of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland going forward at the end of the transition period. The second major move I'd like to focus on is Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So this is what we colloquially call unfettered access. So the UK government will guarantee unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to the rest of the UK internal market from the 1st of January 2021, ensuring that trade from Northern Ireland to Great Britain continues for those businesses as it does now. So this means no import customs declarations as goods enter the rest of the UK from Northern Ireland, no entry summary declarations as goods enter the rest of the UK from Northern Ireland, no tariffs applied to Northern Ireland goods entering the rest of the UK in any circumstances, no custom checks, no new regulatory checks, and no additional approvals required for placing goods on the market in the rest of the UK. The only extremely limited exceptions to this approach apply when goods movements require very bespoke processes, for example, to take into account specific obligations, international obligations, binding on the UK and the EU. And the one that we use as an example here is the movement of endangered animals. So a very, very small number of movements between NI to GB will require additional processes. And this kind of leads to kind of the latest update from HMRC. So in last week, a draft statutory instrument was laid in Parliament that helps give more definition to unfettered access. And what this draft statutory instrument has said is, in essence, that all goods and free circulation in Northern Ireland will be able to have unfettered access to the rest of Great Britain. So this is what we call the phase 1 definition of unfettered access, and it really focuses on goods themselves. So if goods are in Northern Ireland, then they can then be moved into GB. The other side of this proposed definition is that we are introducing new anti-avoidance rules, and the details of this will be released later in the year. And these anti-avoidance rules will, in essence, say that any goods moved through Northern Ireland for non-legitimate purposes will then fall foul of these anti-avoidance rules. So in essence, if a good is legitimately moving through Northern Ireland or from Northern Ireland into GB, as long as the good is in Northern Ireland, then it has unfettered access to the GB markets. But if suddenly movements are changed to go through and take advantage of this unfettered access, then the anti-avoidance rules will be in place to push back and stop those movements from happening. So these rules will be based on purpose. So they will be trying to identify what movements are legitimate and movements are not legitimate movements through NI, but more details of that will be released later in the year. So that is the phase 1 definition of unfettered access. And we're looking into 2021 of moving to a phase 2 definition, which will focus unfettered access specifically on Northern Ireland traders. So we're looking to move into that as soon as possible into 2021, but our immediate priority on the 1st of January is to ensure flow, minimize disruption. So this is where we've gone for the slightly wider definition of goods in Northern Ireland. And I'll gladly take questions about this definition at the end of the presentation, as it is the kind of latest development that's come through HMRC this week. Right, so I'd like to move to another movement, which is GB to NI. So it is the other way across the Irish Sea. As the protocol makes clear, the government has set out in its command paper that there will be some changes to goods movements from Northern Ireland from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. The UK as a whole will leave the EU's customs union, and Northern Ireland will remain unequivocally part of the UK's custom territories. But due to the structure of the Northern Ireland Protocol, there will be some additional customs requirements or movements requirements even between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So what we are committing to is that there will be no new customs infrastructure required to be built in Northern Ireland or in Great Britain port space in Northern Ireland. The only exception to this will be the slight expansion of existing government customs facilities for things like animal health purposes. But there will be no new builds for customs infrastructure between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. No export or exit declarations for goods leaving Great Britain for Northern Ireland. Processes will be fully digital and eligible to be facilitated by the Trader Support Service, and I'll let my colleagues following me kind of speak more about the details of that service. And the regime will be administered by UK authorities, meaning a minimal proportion of checks only is required by the level of risk. So the UK government's position remains that there should be no tariffs payable on all internal UK trade, And in any case, regardless of what is agreed through the Joint Committee, full use will be made of waivers and reimbursements to minimize the impact on businesses in any scenario. And then, yes, an end-to-end trader support service will be available at no cost to all businesses who wish to use it to help support these movements and manage these new customs requirements. So yes, the protocol does entail some new administrative purposes for traders moving goods from the UK to Northern Ireland, including a new digital import declaration requirements and digital safety and security information, of which more detail of the required fields will be kind of released in due time. These processes will be administered by UK authorities in the form of HMRC and Border Force and are needed to make sure that tariffs are not paid within the UK and that the Northern Ireland can benefit from UK FTAs and that goods destined for Ireland and the EU pay tariffs when they should. So this kind of gets into the conversation around at-risk goods. And the concept here is that we are currently working on a definition to be agreed to the Joint Committee of which goods are at risk of moving into the European Union and into the Republic of Ireland, and which goods are not at risk of leaving Northern Ireland. And this will be kind of fundamental to which processes the goods will have to follow and when duties will have to be paid on those goods going forward. But this is an area that we do not have an agreed definition yet. It is part of negotiations, but always one where we are seeking to get an agreement and get that information out to traders as soon as possible. So yes, it is important to note the ultimate destination of goods and whether, for example, traders will be selling them in Northern Ireland or moving them to Ireland and the EU will become relevant to the future. So the best thing we can do to prepare for this at the moment is, regardless of what the definition is, it's likely to rely on the idea of what we can prove and where goods are going to ultimately end up. So more evidence that traders are building at the moment of where their goods move and where they ultimately end up, where their final point of consumption is. This will all help prepare for that definition to be released and for the at-risk rule to be applied. These digital processes that we've talked about will be streamlined and simplified to the maximum extent and will not require an export declaration, exit declaration, or customs or regulatory clearance for goods as they leave the rest of the UK for Northern Ireland. And the Trader Support Service will ensure that the processes are straightforward, even for businesses who have not previously engaged with customs, and that no direct costs are involved. And this is going to be through two primary methods. The first is that they will be supporting businesses with movements themselves. And the secondly is that they will have a role building up an education campaign until for the end of the transition period to help get businesses aware of what they will need to be aware of to successfully be moving goods after the 1st of January next year. But I will allow my colleagues from Trader Support Service to kind of delve more into the specifics of how the Trader Support Service will function. So finally, the other two movements I just want to kind of address at the moment are Northern Ireland to the rest of the world. So the overall process for trading between Northern Ireland and non-EU countries will continue broadly as it does today. So guidance for that is already on gov.uk. You can always speak to a customs advisor for more information about moving goods out of Northern Ireland to the rest of the world. Inherently, that there will be no significant shift in this for the end of the transition period, though we have said the Trader Support Service will be able to support with imports from the rest of the world into Northern Ireland. And finally, Northern Ireland to EU, and this kind of loops back to the start. By virtue of the special provisions applied in the protocol to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, there will be no substantive change for the movements of goods covered by the protocol between Northern Ireland and EU member states, including Ireland. So for goods in free circulation in Northern Ireland, moving to Ireland or other EU member states, that means there will be no substantive checks for goods movements, no customs checks, paperwork or requirements, no tariffs or quotas, and no EU member state able to impose barriers or frictions on goods in free circulation and authorised for the single market in Northern Ireland. So there will be no discrimination against Northern Ireland goods by EU member states. So yes, that kind of gives a quick canter through the various movements and where we are with them at the moment. So unfettered access, the definition that is currently going through Parliament at the moment, it is only a draft definition, knowing parliamentary process. This could change by the end, but you can read through and see the precise wording of that definition. And then the at-risk goods is the other major area where we are still awaiting clarity. And so this is something we're aiming to kind of get agreed through the Joint Committee as soon as possible, but negotiations are ongoing. So yes, that's a quick canter through the various movements and the current state of play with the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I would love to kind of pick up some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. I see we've got a couple of questions in the chat already. I don't know if they all sort of refer to the Northern Ireland Protocol, but let's give them a go. I mean, the first is, it's been confirmed that we'll need a Northern Ireland IORI with an X or XI prefix. We've heard that we may need a Northern Ireland VAT number as well. Has this been confirmed, or could you give us any further information on it?
I can't give further information on the final VAT requirement at the moment, and I cannot give final confirmation on anything to do with excise at the moment, though we have been engaging with businesses and stakeholders on our proposed approach to VAT and excise. We haven't got final agreement through the EU about what the approach will be. So unfortunately, work is still ongoing on those areas.
I suppose the real concern here is how we are going to be able to account for import VAT and you know, the EU VAT directive with the same VAT number. So is that something that is being looked at the moment, and can we expect an answer on that pretty quickly?
I can say it's being looked at, and I can say we hope to get an answer out as quickly as we can, but this is something we are seeking to agree with the EU on how it will work, so I can't give timelines, is the great challenge at the moment, is political negotiation.
Maybe the next one's a bit easier. Can we use a UK deferment account in Northern Ireland, or do we need to apply for a new one? And if so, what about the guarantee?
I don't think we've released details about how that will work yet at the moment. So I don't want to go ahead and confirm, or I think I don't have the technical detail to be able to answer that. I hope it will be in the next round of guidance we release.
Yeah, look, I mean, understand these are not all on your subject, so we'll take these away and pop them through to the stakeholder engagement team. Another question, I don't know if you can help us with this. Will HMRC make available reporting similar to MSS data for Northern Ireland?
I think this is something that we haven't been able to confirm at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think this sort of leads into the next one as well. I think the MSS data is going to be, you know, sort of slightly different in CDS. Are we confident that CDS is going to be ready?
The plan is for CDS to be ready by the end of the transition period. Yes, we are aiming for it to be live on the 1st of January at the moment.
Okay, next one I've got here is, what about GB to NI to ROI? Export declaration required, question mark. So movement from GB into NI and then into the Republic of Ireland.
So we've not been able to talk much about indirect movements at the moment. So we appreciate that, you know, GB to NI to ROI and, you know, NI to GB through ROI are both areas where people have got quite considerable interest. We haven't been able to kind of get details out of what the final requirement will be for those movements. The key thing though is if it's moving from GB to NI, you know, then the GB to NI movements and everything I've set out will work. And once it's NI and once it's in free circulation, then it can then move onwards.
Okay, next one is, should we assume that NI to EU and vice versa movements will require intrastat reporting to be in place? If I had to answer that one, I would say yes, but...
Well, we've confirmed no additional processes, but I believe that intrastat reporting is already in place. So I don't think we've said that it will or won't at the moment. I know this question has been asked previously. And I know that there's quite a few questions that we have not been able to say much more than what's been set out in the NI business guidance so far. But that kind of sits in a hazy grey area between, is it a new process or is it kind of a regular existing process? So I can't confirm at the moment, but we do appreciate that that is an area of concern.
Okay, an interesting one here. Can I buy a car in Northern Ireland with no EU customs duty and drive it to mainland UK and use it unlimited?
If it's for personal use, I believe that you can drive it across. Now, if it is as an aim to avoid kind of duties and customs, even though if you're buying the car in NI, it will have unfettered access. You know, as we've said, the definition of unfettered access for the moment is by good. So yes, you will be able to buy a car in NI and then move it across to the rest of the GB.
This I don't quite understand. Oops, there's quite a few coming through. Can agents use TSS instead of a company having to sign up? I really understand the question there.
I will let my colleagues from the Trade Support Service answer the intricacies about TSS. They'll just be much better placed to give and much more intricate answers than I can give. So can we hold that question off until the next presentation?
Absolutely. And then I suppose this is almost a bit of a reverse concern. How will you guard against goods being channeled through Northern Ireland to get duty-free access into GB? What will stop businesses setting up entities in Northern Ireland?
So this would all be part of anti-avoidance rules, which we'll be releasing details on hopefully in the weeks ahead. But the key part of our approach to anti-avoidance will be to look at the purpose of movements. If businesses are setting up premises in Northern Ireland purely for the avoidance of duty, etc., then they will fall afoul of those rules. And then the definition of those rules will be to stop any new movements that are being channeled through NI purely for the avoidance of duty or other customs processes. So this will all be part of the anti-avoidance package that we aim to get more details out in the weeks ahead.
Okay, the next question I can answer. The first part is how do HMRC expect trade to be ready in time when information is still not being released? And I suppose the first part of that answer is be a member of ACITA. You'll hear it first here, but maybe you could answer the rest of it, Alex.
So we do appreciate that the negotiations are taking time to resolve, and this is a political process, and we would absolutely have loved to get all the details signed off with a considerable amount of time more for preparations to be made before the end of the transition period. Unfortunately, it is a political process. We are where we are. We aim to get as much detail out to you as possible. Unfortunately, because negotiations are ongoing, basically the Northern Ireland Business Guidance released on the 7th of August is about as far as we can go before we get into areas where we can't confirm what the approach will be going forward. And this is not us withholding information that we do know, but this is just things that have not been resolved yet through the joint committee, through negotiations, etc. So anything we said at this point would be conjecture, and there would be a very real risk that negotiations would change, and that would not be the final requirement. So the balance we're trying to make here is trying to not to send people into preparing for things that will then change before the end of the transition period, rendering that to be a pointless use of resources. So yeah, we appreciate that. We appreciate that time is needed, and that preparations do take time, and we are committed to trying to resolve negotiations as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, it's slightly above HMRC's head there and gets into the full negotiations between the UK and GB, of which we can't timetable.
Absolutely, yeah. I suppose the next one is really interesting. How will UK special procedures such as customs warehouse located in NI be treated? Will they still be part of a UK-wide approval, or will separate approvals be required? I find that really interesting from customs warehouse that has got multiple sites, one in UK, one in Northern Ireland. How will that work?
So I can't answer right now, but I know that we're preparing, because we're working on it, a special procedures engagement going forward. So if your member who's asked that question would be interested in being involved in that engagement, I'm sure we'd be keen to slot them in. And I'd gladly take names from ACITA at the end of this presentation of anyone who wants to kind of be involved in that engagement going forward. Now, as with any engagement that we do, the engagement that we're doing on VAT, on excise, on special procedures, this is all helping inform policy positions. This is all very useful to get feedback from the trade and from members. But what these engagements aren't doing is kind of getting the final requirement out to people, because if we had the final requirement for any of these situations, we would shout it from the rooftops, and we wouldn't be doing it through bespoke engagement. So very keen to get more of your members involved who have a special interest in special procedures to kind of get their input into ideas and things. But when it comes to clarifying these, that will have to wait until we've got final agreement on how it will work, and we can release that information to everyone.
And that interest in those special procedures, I mean, who would we, obviously we'll get members to write into us. Would that be with you or Ellie's team, or should we just be going directly into stakeholder engagement?
So that would be our team is running it. So we're getting the policy officials, and I've seen a draft of the engagement plan already. So we are hoping to get this started within probably a week and a half or so. So yes, straight to me, and we'll throw you in with the engagement plan and try and see if we can get some engagement on special procedures to you.
Thank you. And then I suppose final question, yeah. If there is not an FTA with the UA, will there be duties applicable to GB to Republic of Ireland, but not if we move GB to NI to ROI?
So this is where the concept of at risk really comes in. So if the good is considered at risk of moving into ROI through NI, then duties will be payable. And if the good is not considered to be at risk, then either you will not be paying duties when your movement is made, or reimbursements will be made afterwards of tariffs back. Now, the exact definition of what at risk is still under discussion in negotiations, so we can't confirm it at the moment. But the key thing to prepare for this is if you are able to evidence where goods move, particularly up to the point of final consumption, then this will be very relevant information when that final definition of at risk is decided. Yes, and that is if there's no FTA or regardless of the future trading relationship, that at risk rule would be relevant.
Okay, I don't want to take Shanker and Frank's time, so final three questions is, when can we expect a definition on goods at risk to be published? There's a threat of companies planning to stop trading with NI because lack of clarity. So when can we expect a definition on goods at risk?
Unfortunately, it's part of negotiations, so I don't have a reliable timetable of when we can expect any part of negotiations to be concluded. It's a kind of a political matter, and if we tried giving them deadlines, then these deadlines would hold no weight. So we are looking at talks extending probably into November, I think, at the moment, but then this is us looking at the same sites on BBC News, etc., as everyone else's. But it is known that this is a priority definition we need to get out. So we will be looking to, as soon as negotiations resolve and we have a workable definition, to get that out to traders.
I suppose the bit on that, would goods at risk be decided by the UK alone, or would that be something that has to be decided jointly with the EU?
So we're aiming to decide it jointly because it's very relevant to the EU, and the EU will have very strong stances on what goods are considered at risk, because it's going to be the single market the goods are going to be at risk of moving into. We have laid the internal market bill. This bill does give us the powers, if we get to the point, to make some unilateral decisions, but this is not in an attempt to avoid reaching a sensible conclusion with the EU. We are very adamant that a negotiated definition is the best solution to this for many varied reasons, but we do have the internal market bill in place if we need to provide a unilateral definition going forward. But at the moment, there is absolutely no indication that will be used, and negotiations on the at-risk rule are still proceeding at pace.
Okay, and then for goods moving between GB and Northern Ireland via a customs warehouse network, would an import declaration be required at the border, or would a declaration be required as the goods are discharged from the NI customs warehouse site?
So I believe this goes back into special procedures. So we gladly hit that question when we do special procedures engagement, and that be one of the scenarios that we explore.
Brilliant. Then one final question for you, Alex, before I say thank you very, very much. Is there a fallback, or is the fallback for CDS ready?
I think we'll be discussing fallbacks to CDS if CDS isn't ready for the end of the transition period, but at the moment in time, we're looking for CDS to be ready for the beginning of the transition period. So we're not detailing any other fallback plans at the moment. Well,
Alex, I mean, thank you very, very much. I mean, I certainly found that, sort of really informative. I'm sure all the members did as well. I thank you very, very much. I see there are a couple more questions coming through, so we will put that through to you. And thank you. We'll chat to you again shortly.
Thank you very much. I'll happily take any questions in writing, and we do appreciate there's a large number of areas we still need clarification. We're as keen as everyone else is to get that clarification out, so we look forward to communicating out as soon as we have more things we can share.
Thank you. Okay, our next speakers are Shanker Singham and Frank Dunsmuir from, I don't even know who you guys are from Trader Support Services. So I'm not sure who's going first. Is it going to be Shanker or Frank? Looks like Shanker. Shanker, Frank, welcome, and thank you very, very much for taking your time to help us through this Northern Ireland conundrum.
Yes, thank you very much, Des. So I'm gonna go first and cover the. We have quite a lot of slides actually, which we've shared with the ACITA leadership. So they're available to all the members after this event. I'm going to go through some of the slides, and then I'm going to hand over to Frank to cover the sort of final bits of the slide. So what I'll do, and I think if I can just say to go to the next slide, since I think Kevin is handling it. So Kevin, if you can go to, yeah, fine. Just to put a bit of flesh on the bones of what Alex was saying with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol. As he mentioned, the process of moving goods is going to change. I just repeat what Alex said about the fact that you've got to look at the NI protocol differently from the phased transition of the border. So the commitment of the UK and the EU in the Northern Ireland Protocol is this will take place on January 1, 2021. There won't be any phasing. The fact that the UK border elsewhere is being phased doesn't apply to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So in terms of readiness, January 1, 2021 is the operative date. Now, the government has established this free-to-use trader support service. The trader support service, if we can go to the next slide, is intended to really fill a gap. Obviously, because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, there will be a significant number of traders who trade primarily GB to NI, who have never had to fill in customs type forms or the kinds of administrative processes that will be required as a result of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the purpose of the TSS is to sort of pick up that gap and deal with the probably 12,000 or so traders GB to NI who would otherwise need support and help. So we've sort of for the purpose of explanation given you some, the types of businesses that would actually be affected by the changes brought about by the NI protocol, where the TSS might be able to help. So if you're an NI importer, and I should say at the beginning, and we'll repeat this throughout this presentation, the single most important thing I think in our presentation today is to make sure that people register, not only for the register with the Trader Support Service, but also register with the training that the Trader Support Service is making available. So one very important part of the Trader Support Service is the training and education component, which is being run by the Institute of Exports and International Trade. And there is a Trader Support Service organized education and training component that you can sign up for now. And in fact, we have training going on right now. So please make sure that you sign up for all of that. So if you are a business based in Northern Ireland buying goods from GB, then you're going to be covered by this and you should register. If you're a business based in GB selling to customers in Northern Ireland, you should register, because depending on the Incoterms and the your terms of trade, it may be the GB trader that needs to register, or it may be the Northern Ireland importer that needs to register. If you operate, generally across the UK, and you're also, as part of your business, transferring goods between GB and NI, you need to register. If you're a carrier or a haulier who serves, a number of clients, and some of that is GB to NI, you must register. Forwarders also would be covered by this. So our aim at TSS is to capture, the largest group we possibly can. We don't want to leave anyone behind, but we can only do that if people are actually registering on the Trader Support Service, and we'll provide links at the end of the presentation about how that can be done. Go to the next slide. So, and again, just to emphasize some of the things that Alex said, we're going to talk about now what is actually changing. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah, sorry, the next one. We can move on from the picture. Thank you. So what is changing? So as Alex mentioned, GB to NI, there will be across the boundary a requirement for declarations. And it is the intention of the TSS, particularly for the GB to NI sort of standard trader journey, that we provide a simplified process for doing those declarations. That will certainly apply to goods at risk. Now, the definition of goods at risk versus not at risk is as Alex mentioned, a matter for the negotiation between the UK and the EU in the joint committee. I know there's great interest in getting to a very quick answer on what is going to be at risk and what is not going to be at risk. And let me just say there that there are some things that we can tell you even without knowing the result of that negotiation. And one of the things that we certainly can tell you on the at-risk, not at-risk issue, and I think Alex mentioned this before, is it will be a component of this, will very definitely be the need to provide evidence that your goods are, your movements are not at risk. And you'll have, so from the EU's perspective, the Northern Ireland Protocol creates a completely open boundary into their single market and customs union. So you can understand why this not at risk definition is going to be a very difficult area of negotiation. And the more evidence that parties can develop to show that their particular movements are not at risk, the better positioned they will be, depending on how those negotiations go. Northern Ireland to GB. Now, this is not going to be what the TSS will be covering. So the TSS, as Frank will say later on, is divided into various aspects. There's an operational aspect that deals with actually helping traders, doing the customs forms and so forth for traders. There is an educational aspect which is broader than that. So while we will educate in the training sessions and so forth, and we will talk to people about what is needed Northern Ireland to GB, which is not very much. We won't be doing, the TSS won't be doing those processes. So essentially it will occur as it does now. The only additions would be treaty obligations that the EU has made, where there is no way to enforce the treaty obligation because of the open, porous border on the island of Ireland. So that would be things like CITES, as he mentioned, endangered species and so on. But it would also be things like the Kimberley mining process for diamonds. It would be potentially export controls. Some of those goods will move with the need for some processes, some administrative processes. Ireland to and from Ireland, that's a completely porous open border with no checks and no controls. Northern Ireland to and from rest of world will broadly occur as it does today. And my one point I would make with regard to what TSS will do in that area, which is TSS will certainly provide education and training and so forth on what happens Northern Ireland to rest of world, to and from rest of world. And we will talk about the how the Northern Ireland will benefit from UK trade agreements. And the only difference coming out of the transition period is for rest of world goods going into Northern Ireland, the tariff regime for not at risk would be the UK global tariff schedule, but for at risk would be the common external tariff with the potential rebate if the goods don't move into Ireland. But the intention of the TSS here is not to interfere with the existing intermediary market, which already exists for this purpose. So I would just want to make that point. And then transit, and I know there's a lot of transit movements. GB to Northern Ireland, but in particular this GB to Northern Ireland via Ireland route, and transit declarations would apply in that case, and we will be examining exactly how we can support industry as TSS on the transit piece. If we go to the next slide. So this is what the TSS would be looking at. There are going to be import declarations and safety and security declarations for the GB to NI route. For those at-risk movements, tariffs would need to be paid. It's important to note that even if there is a duty-free agreement, a tariff-free agreement that the UK and the EU come to by the end of the year, the preferential rate will only be available, obviously, if you satisfy rules of origin. So depending on the rules of origin that are agreed in the negotiation, there may still be cases where, particularly in things like automotive and others, there may be cases where the duty, the preferential rate cannot be claimed, and therefore there is a customs debt, and that would have to be payable for at-risk goods going into Northern Ireland. Then with respect to SPS, food and agricultural products, while the TSS, it is not in the scope of the TSS to sort of do those checks and controls on behalf of traders. We will certainly include advice, training, education, etc., on the full SPS regime and what is needed. But the important thing to note here is that the island of Ireland is a single zone for these regulatory purposes, particularly for SPS and other aspects related to TBT. So these will be regulatory checks that will be needed as goods move from GB to NI. So if we go to the next slide, please. So Northern Ireland to GB, as we've mentioned, we don't need to dwell on this. No additional processes, no additional restrictions. Export declarations required in those limited circumstances of CITES, Kimberley, diamond mining process, export controls, and so on. And then we go to the next slide. And then on the island of Ireland itself, no new checks, no new regulatory checks, basically nothing that is different from the way things work today. And I think there was a question about intrastat, and yes, things that are being done today will need to be done in the future, including on the SPS side for livestock. You know, some veterinary processes which occur today will continue to occur in the future. So if we go to the next slide. So yeah, this is just making the point that Northern Ireland does benefit from the UK Free Trade Agreement. So as you've seen in the Internal Market Bill, there are provisions in the Internal Market Bill that talk about the fact that Northern Ireland, as agreed in the Northern Ireland Protocol, is in the customs territory of the UK. And there are provisions in the Internal Market Bill about not only unfettered access from NI to GB, but also as free flow as possible between GB and NI, and that's part of the reason for the trader support scheme itself, the trader support service itself. So if we can go to the next slide. Transit will continue to operate in the normal way. It will require transit to be discharged at authorised locations or government offices in Northern Ireland. We are looking, there are ongoing discussions about movements from Europe to the island of Ireland. This is not an area that the TSS would essentially cover for traders on an operational basis. The same for GB to NI via Ireland. That is one area where we're examining exactly how TSS would provide coverage on an operational basis for those transit declarations that would be needed in a movement from GB to NI via Ireland. And then finally, what is necessary for other transit routes, and there are probably 20 or so different kinds of trader journeys that apply, even GB to NI, going through all these different routes. And we will be providing training on all of those different routes. And so again, the plea here is to register for the TSS training courses, which are already ongoing and are already covering these transit routes. If we can go to the next slide. So what is the support that is available, and what do you specifically do now? And if we can go to the next slide. So I think what I'm probably going to do at this point is hand over to Frank to cover what the TSS specifically operationally is going to do for these different routes, and Frank will cover the next slides, and then we'll have a chat. Then we'll answer questions as best we can. Thanks.
Thank you, Shanker, and good morning, everybody. So what I'll take you through 3 sections. The first one in terms of the scope of TSS. So reflecting back on the routes that Shanker has talked through, how do those fit into the services within TSS? The second section, I'll talk a little bit about how we work with the existing intermediary market and the agents within that manage the customs that are required today. And then the third one, end with a little bit more detail on what TSS actually looks like as it's starting to shape up towards launch at the end of the year, and then a reminder of the ask in terms of registration that Shanker mentioned. So first of all, the nature of the routes. Here we've got four examples. So a traditional movement from GB, a GB to NI movement for non-controlled goods, for want of a better expression, would fall pretty much within the remit of TSS in terms of providing the customs declaration services free of charge to that trade. Northern Ireland to and from rest of world is an existing service or capability. There are existing intermediaries there today. And so our view at the moment is that we wouldn't want to impact on that market and affect that community, because TSS is really a 2-year project, not so at the end of it, we would expect that community to be intact as best it can. The third point is transit. Again, you've heard Alex talking about more detail on special procedures to come, but we envisage providing the transit route, which will be a popular route from GB through Ireland, Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland. So we're expecting that to be a fairly popular route due to the crossing situation with Holyhead to Dublin, and we would cover that. And then the fourth one is if you extend that transit route out, and it can be quite an extensive set of journeys and configurations, it tends to fall into rest of world categories, etc. So we're not really envisaging at this stage that the TSS would cover broader transit routes beyond GB to NI. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Excuse me. And the next one. So a little bit about in terms I mentioned there. So what are we doing in terms of working with the existing intermediary market? So for traders within Northern Ireland, they may have existing intermediaries, and we've talked to a number of them already, saying they are highly likely to continue that because they're well known to each other. They get a complementary service. They know the community and the ins and outs of their organisations, and they're looking at continuity in their supply chain, etc. So intermediaries, we're expecting, will continue to help a number of their customers going forward. Traders can learn about available intermediaries from the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, and TSS also has information available around pointing organisations at intermediaries if they want that more intimate service. Next slide. So, do you have the next slide, Kevin, please? Oh, sorry, there you go. So in terms of how we work with how TSS complements that existing marketplace, we will absolutely provide education and information to those traders and to intermediaries, whether those intermediaries are expanding their scope or seeking to expand scope, etc. And traders that are for the first time looking at customs, the world of customs for their requirements. And of course, we can help by directing traders towards intermediaries within the marketplaces itself. In the TSS world, at the bottom there, we, in addition to providing education and guidance to organisations that sign up to the service, we are also providing declarations for them free of charge. And we mentioned digital service there, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then on the right-hand side there, there's a nod towards an important point here, that as traders become accustomed to using, or to the new world of customs, as it were, the intention is this could open a broader market for those traders beyond just the GB customer base, but probably towards rest of the world as well, as they become more accustomed to those processes. So let me get into the meat of TSS, and can we get the next slide, please, Kevin? So in terms of what the TSS will do and what it won't do. So it's a free-to-use service, as Shanker mentioned earlier, and the intention of TSS is it will run for about 2 years or so, filling the gap for the requirements, for the new requirements of trade between GB and NI under the protocols. Now, there are estimates in terms of what that gap is, in terms of the number of declarations. Some estimates are as high as 30 million declarations a year. It's very difficult to pin that down because we do know what the nature of trade that moves between the two regions, but we don't know exactly what that would correlate back to in terms of exact numbers of declarations, etc. So the expectation is there will be a need in the short term for a customs intermediary type service to manage that volume, or a volume of a proportion of that volume, to ensure that trade continues. So TSS offers education and service advice for those traders to get ready to prepare for that, for the new requirements. We're also providing a digital platform, which I'll talk about on the next slide, that manages the administration, setting up the declarations and the processing for those declarations for traders. And it's also a contact center for help and support and issue resolution. It's important to point out what we're not doing on the right-hand side there. So it's not a personal customs advice or brokerage service to the extent of what commodity code should I use, how should I treat my VAT, should I open a customs warehouse facility, etc. Should I be using transit instead? So we are not offering a business advisory service, etc. It's more towards providing the administrative service to create and provide the traders with the customs documentation free of charge. So there's quite a distinction there. And if organizations do need to look at optimizing their supply chains and their cost basis, they would need more consultancy type services around that. And oh, there you go, next one. So what does a service look like? So we thought long and hard about this as the optimum way of setting up a service like this. And the natural conclusion is, if you try and do millions of declarations and set up a service in a matter of weeks to serve that market, then in a traditional manner, and a traditional manner I mean phoning an agent to set up the declaration for you, or an agent typing declarations and details into systems, etc. You would need thousands of agents to do that with, and those agents would need to be experienced. So we're looking at automating that process as much as possible, to make it as efficient as possible, and to make it as less burdensome, if I can use that phrase, as possible on the community. And our trigger point for this is typically with the carriers. And this is an important point. So what we want to avoid is a trader in Northern Ireland contacting somebody in Northampton, buying some goods from them, and then saying, right, now I'll phone up the TSS to get a declaration and then give it to the supplier in Northampton to organize the transport, etc. That would be a very cumbersome process. And you can imagine, the carrier, the haulier would have complications with trying to collect declarations from different suppliers. So the normal process is it comes down to the carrier to create first of all, the security declaration for that shipment. They'll have a security declaration for their vehicle, once they've decided what they're going to ship. And that will be an entry security, safety and security declaration. So if that is raised on the TSS, then we are able to submit that information free of charge and create the security declaration form, the ENS entry. And we're also able to use that complemented with some of their, what we call master data from their registration process to create a simplified frontier declaration for them. So under simplified process, they're then able to move that vehicle from GB to NI using the TSS service. And by using our automated process, we're able to take a lot of the traditional manual work out of those two stages. We're then in the process of sending supplementary declaration information requests out after the goods have landed in Northern Ireland. So depending on whether they're going into free circulation or into some sort of bonded warehouse, etc., we'll send the request for supplementary declaration information to the traders, the ones that have received the goods, and they will then be filling out those documents, that information for us to submit into CDS for the process to be closed out. I won't go into the at-risk and not at-risk process there, but that's a very high-level view of how the process will work. I haven't included transit in that. It's just to give you an illustration. And our intention would be to have more detailed seminars as we go through November to explain and expand on this process in more detail. But that's broadly a view of how the process would work. And the final slide for me, because then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. And there we go. So the final slide is an ask for you to register onto the service, tradersupportservice.co.uk. So that enables us to start capturing you as a potential customer, start collecting some data and some information to allow us to process you in this automated way. It's a very simple process to sign up to. It also gives you access to training courses. So on the same system, you can sign up to training courses and start to get information from our consortium. EORI numbers, we've had questions earlier about an XI EORI number, etc. So if you don't have an EORI number, then certainly a GB EORI number in the short term is important. And at some stage, there will be clarification on the nature of the XI EORI number as well. So if the biggest plea from this session is if you can sign up to the service, then we start to capture the customer base for TSS. That's the update.
Let me just add one quick thing to what Frank was that presentation of what we'll do operationally. For the traders who don't have relevant authorizations and so forth for CFSP and don't have duty deferment accounts and so on, TSS will have those, and the smaller traders will be able to use our authorizations and our duty deferment accounts and so forth. So I'll just want to make that point, and then I'm happy to take any questions.
Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. I mean, it's good to finally have a little bit of meat on the bones around that. I've got sort of lots of questions coming from absolutely everywhere. I mean, people have got my telephone number and they're coming through on SMS, they're coming through on WhatsApp. So you've created quite a bit of interest. I mean, first one here is you talked about a digital platform. Will it support intermediaries that have not yet migrated to CDS?
I don't know, Frank, do you want to take that one?
Just coming off mute. Yeah, it's not an easy answer. So in order to do that, intermediaries, customs agents, etc., typically have either a CSP or custom software provider that looks after their interfaces into customs systems, like today's Chief, and we're moving to CDS. So it's all part of the CDS readiness process. So we are currently looking at this. If it's possible for TSS to somehow help in that process. It's not fully resolved yet, as in we're still going through the technical detail of that, and it's a tricky one. So without going into technical details, it would mean an existing CSP or a software provider for that organization, that broker or that agent, is currently sending information into Chief. If the TSS is operating into CDS, could they somehow move that link into the TSS and into CDS? So that's not necessarily an easy process either. It's almost the same thing. So it's not fully resolved, but my expectation is that organizations would still have to look after their own interface into CDS. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I just add one thing on that, which is if you are a CSP or a software house and you are currently working with HMRC, particularly with respect to using CDS for the frontier declaration, you need to carry on that work. What you should not do is take from this that you can stop doing that and sort of rely on other mechanisms. You need to carry on doing that work. And obviously there are, you know, CSPs in the port and harbour in Belfast that need to carry on with their work in that area.
Yeah, there seem to be a lot of questions coming through on that. I mean, does TSS require traders to apply for CDS via the government gateway? I mean, you guys are answering that. Yes, we've got to carry on with that type of process. Do we only need to apply for an EORI number if we do? Oops, I'm moving up so quickly I can't keep up with the question. Do we only need to apply for an EORI number if we do not have an existing GB one, given you are awaiting clarity regarding the XI EORI number?
I think in all cases you will need a GB EORI number. You're certainly going to need that. The probability is you'll need an EU EORI number as well. Right. So the only issue that's open is the issue of the XI EORI number, and that we unfortunately can't give clarity on today, but we hope to do so, you know, shortly.
And the TSS will need an EORI number to keep to track you know, the various declarations at various phases back to the consignees and consignors. So we would need that.
Yes. Sorry about that. It'll disappear right away now.
Thanks, guys.
The next question sort of follows on from that as well. It talks about you guys are acting as an indirect representative. So if I have no EORI number and go through you, who is at risk, TSS or the government? So I suppose this is around the duty that's at risk, that something is done wrong in a shipment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So yeah, that's correct. But TSS will be an indirect representative for the intention, of course, is to make this easier for small traders. The whole purpose of the TSS program is to ensure that the sort of lived experience of these smaller traders, GB to NI, changes as little as possible. So for that reason, rather unusually, TSS will be an indirect representative for a larger group of smaller traders than would ordinarily be the case, and will therefore take on that liability.
I think the intention, as you were saying, Shanker, is not to take on that liability for larger organisations that are capable of having their own authorizations, etc. So it doesn't want to be offer itself as the an indirect representation for the entire market, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, the way you should think about TSS is it is a non-personalized, non-value-added basic service which is free. So if you are a sophisticated trader, this is probably not going to be something you would want to use, because you'd want to use your existing arrangements where you have lots of value-added services, you have lots of personalized service, etc. TSS is not going to be able to, and nor does it want to, match all of those things. It doesn't want to compete against the big intermediaries, the specialist intermediaries, and so forth. Because the key thing here is TSS will leave in 2 years. So we have to leave the Northern Ireland trade and customs support market in as good a shape as possible. to take full advantage of Northern Ireland's role because of the NI protocol as a sort of export platform. So that's the way to sort of look at look at TSS, I think.
Thank you. Next one. It's where duties paid in Northern Ireland and recovery is allowable for goods remaining in NI. Will TSS support the reclaim process, or is this a separate function belonging to the business?
The intention is yes. Sorry, Shanker.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
The intention is yes, we would support the duty payment and the reclaim process, and again, that's a process that is subject to the nature of the at-risk definitions and the evidences that will need to be provided, etc. So, but the intention is we would support that for traders.
Yeah, for people who don't have a duty deferment account, they will be able to use the TSS's duty deferment account.
Yeah.
Question here, what is the timing for making an import declaration? Does it need to be in place for leaving GB or arriving in NI? I suppose people are thinking about the 6-month implementation period, which doesn't apply to Northern Ireland.
It doesn't apply here. So it's a frontier declaration when it arrives in when it crosses the brown boundary. You need to do a frontier declaration, and TSS will do that declaration, and then there needs to be a supplementary declaration when it's in NI.
Okay, next one. Does it have to be done on a shipment by shipment basis if we move goods GB to NI and to ROI? Is only an import declaration required, i.e. no export declaration?
So import only, and I think the route that you just described around into ROI would require a declaration to say, if it's known it's moving into ROI, then that's effectively an export into the EU. So that would be, but again, Alex was talking earlier about that route, and that process is still under more review. But and Shanker, if you've got anything to add to that one.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you've got a movement from GB to NI that is intended to go into ROI, that is basically a UK to EU movement, and that will require duty to be paid. So there will be a category of traders, and we'll have to figure out, and we'll have to. This will be based on the negotiation between the UK and the EU, Joint Committee, and so on. We'll have to figure out what happens with not at risk and what happens with that category. But with the at risk category, all products that are at risk going into Northern Ireland, it is sort of assumed that there's a risk that they will go into Ireland, and therefore duty will have to be paid, and that duty will be reimbursed. It will be rebated if you can then provide evidence that your good did not go into the Republic of Ireland. So that sort of evidence will be required regardless of who you are, if you want to take advantage of the rebate. So that's the way that process would work. And if it goes into the Republic of Ireland, then, and you have obviously therefore have no evidence that it didn't, then there's no rebate, but the duty will have been paid.
And I think, sorry, Des, there was probably an implication in there about split loads or multiple loads. So can you have a shipment on a vehicle that goes into loads for Republic of Ireland? So again, it's that route between the two regions. So could you have a split load? And I think in theory you can do, as long as you've got the required declarations for each of the consignments within the vehicle.
Okay, thank you. For the sake of time, I'm going to start connecting questions. So can a customs broker or intermediary use TSS? And we should connect that to, will you reject larger customers or who refuse to engage on indirect terms? So, I think you referred to larger business here. They're saying, if I'm too big and too sophisticated, are you going to tell me to fly a kite?
No. So we're not going to reject anybody. I mean, we're not going to leave anybody behind. But I think the point that we were making earlier on is that if you are a large trader, and we've had a number of stakeholder, engagements with individual large traders, and we could continue to do that. And if you're on the call and you're a large trader, please let us know. We can have a chat with you. But what we are finding is that uniformly, large traders are telling us that they want to carry on using their existing intermediaries and their existing processes, and they don't want to use TSS. The only exception to that is the issue around the CDS interface, obviously. That's just we're just saying that that's what we're hearing from the market. The point I think we're making is that the function of the TSS, the core function of the TSS, is to take care of those smaller traders who don't have existing relationships with intermediaries, who've never done this kind of thing before. We've got to make sure that we take care of those people. And so that's not saying that if you're larger, you're on your own. Absolutely not. We'll help whoever, but I suspect that larger traders will want to do it themselves, because you're not going to get the kind of service from TSS that you would be used to getting from your existing trade and customer support systems.
Gentlemen, we have run a little bit over. I mean, thank you. There are a couple more questions here, but if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Kevin to put those through to you, and we can get the answers and post them on our website. I think the message that you guys have sort of delivered here very, very clearly is please register for TSS. I mean, if you are struggling with that registration in any way, or if you need the links or whatever, give Kevin a shout, and he'll pop it through to you. Obviously, we're going to make all these slides available to you, but Shanker, Frank, thank you very, very much. We look forward to the success of TSS. I'm sure we're all going to have to use it, and we look forward to you both sort of giving us an update at our next forum.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Des, and we don't want this to be a one-off. We definitely want to come back and go into more detail, and this is a process. We regard this as sort of the first step of a process of training and education and so on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, our next speaker is Andrew, who is going to speak to us about GVMS. I mean, GVMS is obviously sort of a big concern to all of us, that it is actually going to be ready. I don't think anyone is actually sort of contesting that the process is something that is needed. But Andrew, I'm hoping you can also give us a little bit of context as how this will fit in with the Northern Ireland Protocol, because one of the questions that has already been asked is there's an understanding that GVMS is only going to be ready for rest of Europe by 1st of July, but there was talk about it being ready for Northern Ireland from the 1st of January. So it would be appreciated if you could cover that in your presentation. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, no problem at all. So good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Cawthorne. As Des mentioned, I lead on the readiness aspect of GVMS, and thanks again for inviting me to the meeting today. So what I will do is go through the background of GVMS, what it is GVMS is aiming to achieve, give a high-level overview of that service, and an explanation of how users will be interacting with GVMS. More than happy to touch on delivery plans and data, etc., as part of that roundup as well, conscious of time. So in terms of background, then, the government's been clear that it won't extend the transition period that ends on the 31st of December 2020, but does recognise the impact COVID-19 has had on businesses, and as a result, be introducing border controls at the end of the transition period in stages, starting with some controls from the 1st of January 2021, and moving to full controls for all goods from the 1st of July 21. What this means is that most traders importing goods from EU to GB will now have longer to prepare, can delay submitting information and payment of customs duties to HMRC for up to 6 months after the point of import, with those full customs requirements being introduced from the 1st of July 21. As the UK will join the Common Transit Convention in its own right from the 1st of January 21 and become subject to the requirements of the Convention, then moving to these in stages won't be applicable. So to that end, GVMS will be introduced to support and automate the Office of Transit function from the 1st of January. It should also be highlighted that these stage controls do not apply to NI protocols. So as Des just alluded to there, GVMS will be developed and in place to support GB to NI movements from the 1st of January 21 also. Through a series of collaborative design events, stakeholders highlighted the fact that the model that's currently used at container ports to control goods coming from the rest of the world wouldn't be suitable for all border locations. And drawn on stakeholder evidence and information, we've designed a new customs model, which we refer to as the pre-lodgement model, to achieve full customs controls on EU goods from July 21. That does recognise the practical realities of sort of high volume EU facing locations who may have limited physical space to hold goods. So with that background in mind then, GVMS, Goods Vehicle Movement Service, has been developed to support that pre-lodgement model of customs control. Although border location, just should point out that it's by no means mandatory. So border locations were given the option of either adopting pre-lodgement and therefore GVMS at their locations, or potentially implementing temporary storage or expanding existing temporary storage that may already exist at their locations. And we also gained agreement to a potential mixed model approach. As long as custom control can be demonstrated from the border location, then some sort of hybrid, which is a combination of pre-lodgement and temporary storage, is permissible. So the definition of customs control, and to achieve it, we need to ensure that all goods are presented and declared to customs for both imports and exports. That HMG has the opportunity to intervene and carry out checks and risk assessments on any goods that require documentary or physical checks. That HMG is notified once the goods have physically left the country in the case of exports. So under that pre-lodgement model, which GVMS is looking to support, then to achieve control while maintaining flow, we need to ensure that all goods coming into the country have the declarations made before they board on the EU side, that we risk assess and clear as many import and transit declarations as possible before the goods arrive in the UK, that we communicate to the person in control of the goods. So if we take an example of a EU GB RoRo movement, that could be the haulage company, the driver of the lorry, that we indicate to them by the time they arrive in the UK, either that the goods are cleared to proceed on with the journey, or alternatively that the goods require a check. And for exports, we need to ensure that goods don't proceed to the point of departure until they have something that we call P2P status, permission to progress, and that HMG is notified again once the goods have physically left the country. So those are the requirements that GVMS is looking to support. That's the sort of problem that GVMS is looking to solve, if you like. So I'll, if I could ask you to move to slide 3 on the pack, and apologies, I'm dialed in as opposed to connected by Zoom. But I'll just run through the end-to-end journey, and the example chosen is just an EU GB import because it covers all sort of bases. But then we will briefly touch on the export scenario as well. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that GVMS is there as a facilitation piece to ensure that smooth flow at border locations and ensure those requirements I've just mentioned are met. But what it doesn't do is impact on the need for a customs declaration to be made or impact on how that customs declaration is made. So we class that whole process as a sort of prerequisite or a precursor, if you like, prior to the GVMS journey proper commencing. So we would need the declarant or the trader to have submitted a customs declaration or transit declaration in the case of a transit movement, and receive back from the respective HMRC header duty system that declaration reference number. So the example that's given on the end-to-end flow that you're looking at the moment is an ERN that's been returned from Chief. We need the trader to pass that declaration reference on to the party that they've commissioned for to move the goods, be that a haulier or a freight forwarder. We also need that haulier or freight forwarder to carry out a one-time registration on the GVMS service. So this is a relatively straightforward online registration. Only needs to be done once, and it's accessed using a government gateway credentials if they're already held, or if not, we'll branch off from the journey and talk them through the process of obtaining government gateway credentials. Once that registration has taken place, they'll then have access to the GVMS functionality to be able to carry out the steps that we're just about to discuss. Okay, so prior to moving the goods then, we ask that the haulier, every time they're going to move goods into GB, they create a goods movement reference, or a GMR. And that GMR becomes an envelope to all intents and purposes with its own specific reference number assigned to it that the haulier can populate with information. So what do we mean by that? So in a particular movement, if we have sort of 20 different consignments coming in, all with each with their own individual customs declaration, then each of those declarations can be used and attached to one GMR. So instead of having to present 20 different things at the frontier, they only present the one master reference for check-in and validation. That goods movement reference, again, to keep the process as flexible as possible, can be created up to 28 days in advance of the movement, so that the haulier can sort of drip feed information into there as they receive the various declarations from the trader. So under the GMR, they're going to input all of their movements. And what we also ask them to do is to add the details of the vehicle, trailer, or container that they're planning to use for the crossing. In terms of the actions that I've just sort of mentioned, we've created two different options for the haulier. They can interact with the service in the traditional method, which is sort of a web-based portal approach by logging on and manually creating the GMR and manually attaching declaration references to it. But we envisage for the bigger operators, they'll look to make use of our API approach, application program interface, whereby we create a direct link between haulier's existing backend systems and the GVMS service itself, so that a lot of the steps I've just mentioned can be folded into existing business processes and automated, obviously cutting down on the manual overhead created. So a goods movement reference has been created, declarations have been attached to it, and they've also attached the vehicle details for a particular movement. All of this, again, we're expecting to be done away from the port in the EU. And once the haulier is happy and content that all of the information is captured within the GMR, the vehicle details are correct, and we do give them the flexibility to change vehicle, container, trailer reference all the way up to the point of checking in at the EU port, they would then make their way on the journey. Okay, so upon arrival at the EU border location, the EU place of exit, the haulier presents the GMR that's being created to the carrier. So that's the ferry operator at the point of check-in. The ferry operator will capture that GMR, and they will also capture the vehicle, trailer, container details that have arrived at their location. An initial sort of validation check is then carried out against the GVMS service. So we're looking to ensure that the GMR that's been presented is legitimate, that it's in the right format, that it isn't a duplicate and hasn't been used previously on a different crossing, and that the vehicle, container, trailer details that have been provided match what's actually arrived at the border location. Assuming that validation check returns a positive response, the vehicle will be allowed to board the vessel. If there are any inaccuracies with any of the information that's been presented, then the expectation is that the carrier would turn the haulier away with an instruction to carry out corrective action before they sort of represent the goods movement reference. Again, understanding the impact that may have on flow, we're doing as much as we can with the haulier community to make them aware of the process and the importance of all of the information which is presented being accurate and correct. And we'll, as I say, we'll fold that into guidance due to be published, and we'll also bake as much of that into the web-based approaches as possible, including sort of upstream and validation. So when declaration references are attached to the goods movement reference, we'll carry out a sort of behind the scenes lookup to the respective head of duty system. So in the example that you've got in front of you there against Chief, just to allow the haulier to make that informed choice of movement to the port. So we'll notify them if any ERNs that they've attached to the goods movement reference are invalid, so they can raise that query with the declarant or trader well before making their way to the EU port. But again, staying with the happy path scenario, assuming that everything checks out and they've boarded the vessel. Sorry, I should add as well that that carrier interaction again is by means of a application program interface, so that's a direct link from the carrier to ourselves, and the service levels that are sort of baked into that are extremely quick. So we're talking no longer than 5 seconds to return that response back from GVMS for 95% of transactions, and no more than 10 seconds for all transactions, just to keep that smooth flow through the board location. So that API that the carrier uses for the validation check is then used again once the vessel is full. So on bow doors up, when the vessel is set sail to GB, the carrier will again, as I say, using that API link, send us a list of all GMRs which are on their way to GB. GVMS system then disaggregates the GMR, sort of strips it back to declaration reference level, so that we can carry out the arrival of those various declarations and any associated risking that needs to take place. So GVMS sort of acts as the conduit, passing the message from the haulier, breaking down the goods movement reference into its component parts and sending a message off to head of duty systems to carry out the arrival, and that's all done during the duration of the crossing. So the service level agreement that we've got in place for that works to the lowest common denominator, which in this case is the Eurotunnel crossing at around about 35 minutes. So working on the assumption that if we can make it work for Eurotunnel and get the responses back within 20 minutes in all cases, then that'll by default work across all other crossings. So once that arrival and risk and activity has taken place in head of duty systems, we'll then again via GVMS return a response to the person in control of the goods, notifying them of the outcome of that risk and activity. So in the case of a positive response, that'll just be to confirm that no checks are required and that the vehicle's free to continue on with its journey upon arrival at GB, barring any ad hoc checks that Border Force colleagues may look to implement. Or alternatively, if a particular movement has been selected for checks to take place, we'll notify the person in control of the goods of that particular outcome and direct them where they need to proceed. Understanding the sort of constraints and the difficulties in passing that message to the person in control of the goods, we also look at other actors in the end-to-end flow to help us deliver that message. So we're working with the carrier community to understand what may be possible from their aspect to helping us with that message. So again, using that API that's already been mentioned, we will return the response to the carrier. By default, the trader declarant is informed of the outcome of that declaration check. As I've said, GVMS already targeting the haulier and returning the response to them via GVMS. And what we've also done following engagement is develop the same functionality for the board locations themselves on GB side, so that they know what the position is for any movements coming into their location. And we're exploring ways that they might be able to help us to ensure that correct routing takes place on arrival at their locations. So just to sort of close the loop on the process then, if no further checks are required, the vehicle makes its way to its final location. If further HMG intervention is required, then the vehicle is directed to the appropriate location. And depending on the makeup of the GB port, that may be checks which are carried out in the port itself, if there's the space and the facilities to accommodate that, or alternatively, it may be to route them to an inland location for the checks to be carried out. Once the checks are completed, the head of duty system is updated, giving it that sort of cleared status, which in turn updates GVMS, and again, the vehicle is free to continue with its journey. So that is the end-to-end sort of import process. So there's some sort of key principles there to call out and draw your attention to. So the goods movement reference is created. As I say, it can be done up to 28 days in advance. It's then populated with the declaration references for all movements, for all consignments within a particular movement. It's populated with the vehicle registration number in the case of an accompanied movement, or it could be a trailer container number in the case of unaccompanied. The GMR itself presented a point of check-in with the carrier, where it's checked and validated. The carrier notifies us at the earliest possible opportunity, bow doors up, of the complete list of GMRs that are on a crossing. GVMS disaggregates the GMRs, arrives and risks all the individual declarations, and returns a response to the person in control of the goods, notifying them of the outcome, to ensure that on arrival in GB, the correct action's taken. So those principles, if we could just move on to slide 4, please. Those similar principles also apply in the case of exports. The key difference is when we ask the trader in the first instance to submit their declaration, we ask them to submit something that we called an arrived customs declaration, so that the risk and activities carried out there and then. That may be the permission to progress is given in the first instance, and they can make their way to the GB port, or alternatively, if there's a controlled outcome, they may need to attend a HMRC facility for checks to be carried out. And once those checks have completed, that P2P status would be granted at that point. Essentially, we're just looking for movements only arriving at the GB location if they have that P2P status. On arrival at the GB location, again, the GMR is presented as evidence that all the necessary pre-lodgement steps have been carried out. It's again captured by the carrier and submitted by means of an API to GVMS to carry out a validation check. At that point, it's re-arrived, and in a small number of cases, Border Force colleagues may wish to carry out additional checks. But assuming that no further checks are required, again, the vehicle will be allowed to board the vessel. And finally, on bow doors up, once the vessel sets sail from GB, the carrier will trigger a notification to advise GVMS that the list of goods movement references which have departed GB, and again, we carry out that segregation, breaking the goods movement references down and send a notification off to the respective header duty system to notify them that the goods had left GB, sort of closing the loop on the export declaration. Okay, appreciate it's quite a lot of information to take in a relatively short period of time, but I will pause there and hand over to yourself, Des, if there's any questions on the back of that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I mean, really helpful. I find your slides really helpful, so thanks very much. I mean, there are a couple of questions coming through. I'm trying to understand the questions, so I don't know. First of all, I mean, based on a port being able to elect to adopt GVMS, port can remain as a temporary storage location and not adopt GVMS. Is there a future intention by HMRC
No, that's certainly nothing I'm aware of, Des. I think what we've always said is the end game for us is that a particular border location can demonstrate that full customs controls can be met. Now, if they can demonstrate those full customs controls through temporary storage at their location, then that's absolutely fine. I don't think we're going to sort of pressure anyone into taking up GVMS. From the engagement that we've had to date, I know there's quite a few ports who have expressed their preference as being GVMS or some kind of mixed approach. But we're just looking to sort of baseline that position, and that's something that we'll be coming out with in due course to give that definitive list, certainly across all of the main sort of rural locations across GB. But
So
no, in answer to the question, nothing I'm aware of where we would longer term look for everyone to adopt this approach.
So it is, I mean, it's the port location and what the port decides that determines whether you can or cannot use GVMS then.
That's right. It's a commercial decision to be made at the port, but a lot of the ports are bringing the carriers that operate out of their location into that discussion, so that it's a sort of combined response across both the port and the carriers operating from that port. But again, it is meant as a facilitation. If you can imagine a scenario where GVMS didn't exist and each of those declarations had to be presented individually, then the sort of impact that would have on flow, etc., doesn't really bear thinking about. So it is there as a facilitation. Granted, it puts some more sort of steps or responsibilities, liabilities on a number of actors. But I think in this particular case, the benefits sort of outweigh the cons in that regard.
Okay. Next one here is under GVMS, customs intermediary creates export and import entry, advises hauler of references, and then does hauler have to raise the GMR, or could the intermediary do that for the haulier?
So we're sort of exploring ways that may be possible. The current stance is that the haulier or the freight forwarder would need to create the goods movement reference and then obtain those declaration references. But we are working with sort of intermediaries to understand possible linkage, and it may be that what's delivered for day one that gets us over the line and allows everyone to meet the sort of legal requirements may look sort of very different sort of 6-12 months down the line when we've made further sort of enhancements and iterations to it. But we're just exploring with them now what possible linkage we can have in readiness for day one.
Will GVMS link with the French, Belgium, Dutch and Irish versions where pre-lodgement is required in the EU?
Right, so no, this is purely for GB imports and exports. So it is a standalone service at day one. Again, I can't speak longer term as to what the plans will be and any possible linkage with those systems will be. But for day one, it's purely a standalone service. So it'll allow you to meet all the requirements for bringing goods into and out of GB. But it may be that you also have, well, no, maybe about it. You would need to interact with those other systems separately, at least in the short term.
On a very similar scene, the GVMS seems very UK centric. Is it going to communicate with the French smart border system and only grant P2P when an import entry is lodged?
Yes, I think the same response would apply to that one, Des. So for day one, it would be standalone. There's no planned linkage at all for January or July with any other system. So the only sort of systems linkage that we have for those dates is with CDS, Chief, NCTS for transit movements by means of a portal, GB Safety and Security, and ICS in the case of Northern Ireland.
Okay, there's a lot on the similar theme here. Here's another one. Am I correct in understanding that an EU hauler will require a UK EORI and government gateway account?
That's correct. So an EU haulier, and we're working with colleagues, BPDG colleagues in getting that message out to the EU haulage community. But yeah, they would need a GB EORI to access the system, as well as government gateway credentials. So we're working to ensure that journey I've just discussed works for EU hauliers and the sort of language barriers presented, etc. But no, we know that the EU haulage community makes up I think on latest figures, well over 80% of the movements into GB.
Okay. Next one, will it be ready in time, and what contingency is in place if it fails? And are the ferry companies or operators on board from an integration and testing perspective?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work with the ferry operators, the sort of 9 major ferry operators that go into the 24 sort of ro-ro ports. We've created a sandbox testing environment, so this API that I've discussed, they can develop the API. We shared tech specs, etc., with them a good while ago now, so they can test against the various endpoints and ensure that data flow is working as it should. So yeah, we've got ongoing, in some cases, weekly engagement with the major carriers. Sorry, Des, I've answered the end of the question. I've completely forgotten the start. Oh, will it be ready in time? Yeah, everything I'm hearing from the IT arm of the project is that deliveries moving to time, and that we're optimistic that the scope that I've mentioned there in terms of what's needed for day one, which is GVMS to support transit and GBNI movements, will be there ready for day one, with the full customs controls coming further down the line. Well, we've got additional sort of releases which are carried out well before the 1st of July, when full customs control, and obviously the volume through GVMS ramps up exponentially at that point. In terms of a fallback, there's a whole sort of team dedicated to developing this sort of contingency in place if this isn't ready for day one. And we've also got a sort of business continuity team working up what happens if it's there for day one and then subsequently falls over or needs to be taken offline for maintenance, etc. So all that information we'll be looking to publish. I suppose the fallback position in the case of transit for day one would be a sort of reverting to the manual sort of paper-based process which already exists, which isn't ideal, but it's there as an option. But yeah, everything from the last updated report I got from IT colleagues, everything's flagging that we're still on track with no major sort of issues identified.
No, this is in fact a GVMS question. It says, if an EORI for a UK CFSP authorised trader, is an EORI for a UK CFSP authorised trader sufficient to get a consignment onto a ferry? I think that refers more to sort of that 6-month implementation period, but
possibly. I'm not 100% sure on it. I know that we do still allow entry in declarants records for those with the relevant approvals, and in that case, the only thing that we asked to be attached to the goods movement references is the EORI. So I don't know if it was perhaps relating to that. So for any operators with entry and declarant record approval, then the only thing that we would need is the GB EORI to be attached to the GMR, on the basis that all that lower level detail would be available if it needed to be checked through the declarant zone record.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I mean, if it's anything to go about, I mean, a whole lot of people are worried about timing here, but your timing was absolutely perfect. So maybe we should take that as a view of what's to come with GVMS. I thank you very, very much. I mean, I've seen with TSS, there's a whole lot more questions that have come through, so I'm sure they'll be exactly the same for you. And
more than happy to take those away, Des. If you get those across to us, I've got a whole sort of team support me. I don't claim to be the founder of all knowledge for all aspects of this, but I'll certainly be able to put it in the direction of somebody who will be able to respond and get that back to you as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, really appreciate it. It's great. It's helpful. As I say, those slides are going to help me tremendously, and I'm sure will help a whole lot of other people as well. So thank you very, very much.
No problem at all. Thanks for the invite.
Okay. Next, we have Teresa Goodwin from HMRC is going to speak to us about CFSP, which I think is seen to a large extent as the sort of customs regime that is going to solve all our problems during the 6 months implementation period. So I do hope Teresa is here and available.
Yes, I'm here, Des.
Thank you. Handing over to you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Yes, as Des has mentioned, I'm here to talk to you about the simplified customs declaration processes. This is also known as CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, but it does appear in our legislation as it is stated on the screen there. So, simplified declarations allow authorisation holders to reduce the burden of making a full customs declaration at the border and defer submission of some information and payment of customs duties until the end of the month. There are two simplified customs declarations processes. Simplified declarations procedure, which is known as SCP, where you can provide a reduced declaration at the point that your goods cross the border, and entry into clearance records, which is referred to as EIDR, where you make an entry into your commercial records, which includes the details of the goods, the date and time of import, and the customs procedure they have been placed in. In both procedures, the first part of the declaration is followed by a supplementary declaration. Now, simplified procedures can be particularly useful when used in conjunction with authorisations for customs special procedures. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, hold on 1 minute. I'll just turn off something in the kitchen because that may be affecting my mic.
Hi, Teresa. The audio is incredibly bad. I mean, is there something that we can do to improve the audio somehow?
I've just switched my oven off. Does that help at all?
Oh, definitely. Yes, definitely.
Right.
Thank you.
I will save cooking my lunch until after I've spoken to you then.
Do appreciate it. I owe you one then. Thank you.
No problem, Des. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, please. So the requirements for simplified declarations are that you or your agent would need to be authorised to use simplified declarations for CFSP. You'd need a duty deferment account to pay any customs duties due. Access to HMRC systems, either Chief or CDS, including the Chief badge and the necessary indicators that allow submission of simplified declarations. Now, all of that will be set up as part of your authorisation process. And also access to software that allows the collation of the data into supplementary declarations. The software generally helps with keeping the entry into clearance records as well up to the standard that you require. Simplified declarations are supported by commercial software, and this helps to maintain, as I say, the necessary records and automatically collect declaration information into supplementary declarations. The software can generally produce these files that can easily be uploaded to Chief or CDS. You may choose to obtain the authorisation for simplified declarations yourself, or appoint an agent that is authorised to use simplified declarations to act on your behalf. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So for authorisation, you will, as I say, need to hold a duty deferment account to pay any customs duties due. If you are an agent acting on behalf of importers, you may use the importer's deferment account if they have one. You will need to be established in the UK. This means that you must be resident in the UK or have a permanent place of business in the UK. So, yes, non-established businesses will be excluded from applying for authorisation. However, non-UK residents will be able to still use the authorisation, providing they engage with a UK established agent. So you will need to have a good customs compliance record, and this includes submission of VAT returns and duty deferment payments, and key personnel are free of any criminal records that could stop HMRC issuing the authorisation. Records must also be kept for a minimum of 4 years after the submission of the supplementary declaration. You will also need to demonstrate how you will manage your deferment account limit and have procedures in place to keep records and manage declarations and identify and report any errors. You will also need to demonstrate you can carry out declaration procedures to a professional standard and ensure that you meet licensing and other control requirements, and you manage your business in a way that allows customs to make effective compliance checks. For an example, how you keep the audit trail and your business records are backed up and kept secure. So if we move on to look at the individual procedures.
Hi, Teresa. I mean, it still seems to be disappearing on, you're disappearing on us and coming back. Hoping it might be sort of try repositioning the microphone, because sometimes it's okay and sometimes it seems to disappear.
Okay. I'll move the computer a little bit nearer to me, and hopefully that will help.
Sounding much better. Thank you.
Good. Okay, I'll try not to move around too much. So simplified declaration procedures. This requires a simplified frontier declaration to be submitted to Chief or CDS at the point that the goods cross the border. From 1st of January, though, this will need to be pre-lodged for goods arriving at non-inventory linked locations. So you will need to check the location that the procedure that you need to use at the specific location that your goods will be coming into. Once the simplified frontier declaration has been accepted and any border checks completed, the goods will be released from the port. From 1st of January, simplified frontier declarations goods arriving at non-inventory locations can be arrived up to the end of the working day following the arrival of the goods. So you won't necessarily need to wait at the port to arrive your goods and then move on. You will be able to move on, providing Border Force are happy for you to proceed without further checks. First part of the declaration is followed by a supplementary declaration, and I'll talk more about the supplementary declaration in a short while. So moving on to entry and clearance records. So this does look at a daunting amount of information that you have to keep, but it is information that should be readily available to you as part of your normal business records, things that you would normally receive as part of your of details about your consignment. So you need to record the customs procedure code. Now this relates to what you're actually doing with the goods, and the customs procedure code can be found in the published tariff. You'd need a unique consignment reference number, and this can be an invoice number or a stock record number. It can also be the declaration unique consignment reference number, which you obtain when you submit your safety and security declaration. Other details include the purchase invoice numbers, sales invoice numbers if it's available, written descriptions of the goods and details of the commodity code. And also to the quantity of goods that you're receiving. So if we move to the next slide, and I'll talk through some of the other details that you may need. So in addition to that, some of the details that you may need, depending on what you're doing with the goods and depending on what the goods are things like the stock account reference number and the warehouse approval number if you're putting the goods into a warehouse. The licensing requirements and license numbers and any supporting documents, including the serial numbers, which allow you to track the goods through your records. And also too, some goods you will need licenses and certificates for, and you will need to record those to make sure that it's clear that you had those at the time that you imported the goods. If you are an agent, you will also need to record the details of the person that you're representing and how you're making that declaration. And again, same with simplified declaration procedures, you will also need to follow that with the supplementary declaration. Okay, I noticed another question come up. Okay, so with regard to non-established businesses, it will be the agent that will need to keep the entry into clearance records and to also submit the supplementary declaration. The non-UK established business would not be able to do that themselves. So if we move on to supplementary declarations. So a supplementary declaration must be submitted by the 4th working day of the month following the import, or the date of the simplified frontier declaration. So if you are importing your goods using entry into clearance records, and you are importing them on the 5th of April, you will have until the 4th working day of May to submit your supplementary declaration. There are exceptions to this. This is generally where declarations are made into customs warehousing and where movements between customs procedures, where goods are moving between customs procedures, providing the necessary criteria is met. And this means that in those circumstances, the supplementary declaration can be waived. Once you've submitted your supplementary declaration and it has been accepted into Chief, the duty is calculated automatically. And this is based on the information that you have input, and the duty is then paid monthly by direct debit via the duty deferment account. Timing of that will depend on whether you are importing excise goods or not, but generally, unless it's excise goods, then the duty is due or the duty is paid on the 15th day of each month. A supplementary declaration may cover a single import or combine data for declarations over 1 day or 10 days, and this is known as aggregation. This can reduce the number of supplementary declarations that you submit and may make it easier for you to keep your records. You'll also need to submit a final supplementary declaration at the end of the month. And this is due at the same time as all of your supplementary declarations. And this tallies the number of supplementary declarations that you are submitting across the month and makes sure that nothing is missed. So it just acts as a second check to make sure that you've submitted absolutely everything that you need to. So that is quite a whistle-stop tour of simplified declarations. With the staged controls, you may want to use entry in declarant's records and delay your declaration for up to 6 months. By the time that you make your first supplementary declaration, you must make sure that you have authorization to use simplified procedures and also your deferment account. So by the time that you want to submit anything to us, you will need to make sure that you are authorized, or you may want to use an agent to do that for you. So, Des, is there any further questions that I haven't picked up within my presentation?
Quite a few.
I gathered there might be.
Yeah. Where do we start? CCG is required for what you call it, a CFSP authorization now, but will not be required for a CFSP authorization from 1 January onwards, because you know, the rules around guarantees are changing, and you can apply for a waiver. Can you put an application in now without a CCG and still have it processed by HMRC?
Yes, you can have your application processed, and we will issue you with the authorization on the proviso that it will not be used until 1st of January. It will not be valid until then. Okay, so you will, the process to or the forms to apply for a duty deferment account without the CCG will be available shortly online, and so you will be able to submit your CFSP application as soon as you're ready to, and then apply for your duty deferment account slightly later once the process and the forms are in place and online.
Okay, thank you. Next one, we're talking about, you know, someone able to act as direct representative on behalf of someone else using CFSP. Now, interesting question, or two interesting questions here is, this seems to be sort of aimed at a broker acting on behalf of a trader, but could one trader act on behalf of another trader on a direct basis using their CFSP and deferment account just for payment sort of right at the end of this process? Or are they going to have to go through the whole sort of idea of actually registering if they've only had sort of 5 or 6 shipments in that first 6-month period?
With regard to a trader acting on behalf of another trader, I would have thought that the trader that's authorized would take on the responsibilities of being an agent at that stage. So because they're acting on behalf of somebody.
Yeah, I think this is very much about a broker that is not authorized for CFSP,
okay,
and 2 traders that are importing. So I'm trying to think how you'd actually reflect that on the declaration, but they're saying because, you know, one entity can act on behalf of another entity on a direct basis, can that be done without the first trader assuming that joint and several liability?
I think I would prefer to take that question away, if you don't mind, Des, and speak to somebody about that. Purely because it's not quite my policy area. I have been involved with it, but it's not something that I'm involved with currently. Okay,
yeah, no, anything, you know, any sort of additional questions we will sort of note, so we'll take that one down and you know, as part of those that we pass to you afterwards.
That's perfect.
Yeah. One of the others is the VAT implication that is obviously a tremendous concern to everyone. So if you're going through the sort of process of you know, sort of delaying your declarations, that doesn't release you of your liability for VAT. How is that VAT going to be reported? Because that 6-month period is not going to be aligned with your periodic submission of your VAT.
Yeah. So if you are VAT registered and you are using entry and declarance records either with or without authorization and with or without using the delay, then you must be reporting your import VAT as part of your VAT return. If you're not VAT registered, then we will charge the import VAT as part of the customs duties, which will be collected when the supplementary declaration is submitted.
And I suppose just adding to that, with postponed import VAT accounting coming in, I mean, that will still apply at the end of that deferred period if you've elected to adopt that deferred period. Yes.
So if you postponed VAT accounting is not time limited, so you will be able to continue to take advantage of postponed VAT accounting. If you are using EIDR between January and July, then you must use PVA. If after 1st of July you find that it's more convenient for you or easier for you to use your supplementary declarations or full declarations to pay for your import VAT and then reclaim, then you can revert to doing that if you so wish. So that it will no longer be mandated after 1st of July, but before 1st of July is mandated.
Okay. Then next question is direct representation. Direct representation for CFSP holders. Is this a temporary 6-month process, or will we be able to act as direct representative on a permanent basis?
We haven't made this time limited policy. However, what we will be doing is monitoring the progress of the policy and its effect past 1st of July, and we will make sure that it is working as we intended it to be. If at that point when we review it, it doesn't seem to be working or we need to make further changes, then we will give a specific time period that it will be available for and then make the changes. So you'll be made aware of what we are doing before we do it.
Makes sense. Okay. Next one. If a non-established business can use the staged import process, will that non-established business be expected to, or is it, sorry, where will that non-established business be expected to keep their records? At their overseas premises or at the CFSP authorised intermediary?
If the importer is non-UK established, then we would expect the agent to be making the entry and declarance records on their behalf and also the supplementary declaration.
So that the records would have to be kept here at the CFSP's holders premises then?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The application for CFSP is lengthy and complex. Any plans to simplify the application and approval process?
We have taken steps as far as we possibly can to do so. Again, for further policy decisions on that and policy understanding on that, I prefer to defer to one of my colleagues.
I can actually sort of talk from a bit of personal experience there. A whole lot of my customers that we've supported with CFSP applications, I mean, we've actually done the post-authorization audit on the phone during COVID-19. The application process has been a lot shorter than 120 days. So from personal experience, there seems to be, sort of quite a bit of cooperation from the authorization section within HMRC. Don't know
Good.
if I was supposed to say that, but that's the way it's been. That's the way it's been working. Yeah.
No, thank you for that feedback. That's good to know.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it feels like there's sort of a complete change in it's a very cooperative approach, which is, you know, obviously welcomed by industry. So thank you for that. Next question: did I hear right that an unregistered trader can use EIDR and CFSP providing the intermediary retains all records? I think, yeah, similar question to the previous one.
Mm-hmm. So if you would like to take advantage of the delayed declarations, or you are unable to make declarations in any other way, then you can use entry into clearance records without authorization, providing the goods that you are importing do not appear on our controlled goods list, which has been published within the border operating model, and it will also appear on gov.uk guidance very shortly. So you can take advantage of that, and you can do so without authorization. However, you must find an authorized agent to act on your behalf to make your supplementary declarations, or obtain authorization yourself by the time your supplementary declarations are due.
And that authorized agent, would they be acting as an indirect representative?
So they can, the agent in that case can act either directly or indirectly.
Oh, isn't that a huge risk area?
It is, but it's something that we have identified that we can do to help traders. And
okay, I've actually been chasing people away that have asked that. So there's a whole lot of customers that I'm going to go knock on their door and say, okay, come back. I have no liability here.
So the restriction there is that any non-UK established intermediary importers must be represented indirectly. So you will retain joint liability for anyone that is non-UK established.
We're actually getting messages through here that says that seems to run counter to published draft legislation. So I think this is one we just need to sort of confirm 100%.
Okay.
Do special procedure holders have to have their own CFSP from 1/12/21? Sorry, it points to the wrong place. From the 1st of January 2021. So special procedure holders.
Yes, so if you want to use simplified declarations to put your goods into a customs procedure from import, then you will need to be authorised to use simplified procedures before that date. And you will also need to sorry, I've lost the train of thought now. Yeah, so you will need to be authorised to use simplified declarations before you actually use them to put goods into a customs procedure. You won't also be able to delay your supplementary declarations if the goods are going into a special procedure. You must submit them within the normal timelines that would be allowed as part of your authorization. For goods coming out of a special procedure, so goods that have been imported from the EU and have gone into, for example, a customs warehouse, you can use entry in declarance records without authorization to remove those goods from the procedure, but those goods must be going directly into free circulation. And again, you will be able to delay your supplementary declaration for the 6 months after those goods have been removed from warehouse. This only applies to goods that are not controlled. So any goods that appear on our controlled goods list will be excluded from using that.
Okay, another one here. Does a company have to be AEO authorized to apply for CFSP in a deferment account?
No. You can AEO may make it easier because you've already gone through a number of our checks, but you do not have to be AEO authorized to use simplified declarations.
Okay. A lot of these are the same. Can an agent make an EIDR declaration on my behalf without me as the importer having a CFSP authorization?
Yes, the agent can. The agent would need to have CFSP authorization by the time you need to submit your supplementary declarations.
Okay, and just one more, we are sort of running out of time here. If I make my supplementary declarations monthly, can I still delay my duty payments by 6 months?
No, by submitting your supplementary declaration, you are almost saying that you are ready to pay the duty, and you are ready to actually take part in the whole process at the right time or within the right time frames. So we have not allowed payment to then be delayed once the supplementary declaration has been submitted. Also too, I'm not too sure how you would then keep track of what payments you've made and what payments you haven't, to make sure that you can monitor your duty deferment account successfully. So we have said that once the supplementary declaration has been submitted, that payment will be taken on the next available 15th day of the month.
Okay, we are out of time, but Teresa, thank you very, very much. That was really informative. There are a whole lot of additional questions here, and they're all sort of almost on the around the same subject. We seem to be having a couple of arguments going on online here, so I'll put them all together and put them through to you, and hopefully we can get some clarification back that we can publish online. But thank you very, very much. I mean, the slides are also extremely helpful, and hope you can now carry on making your lunch, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity for presenting.
Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, finally, I mean, a view from Brussels. Yves, I've been looking to this. I like the look of your slides so far. So, all over to you, sir.
Thank you, Des. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be back in front of you, if not in person, at least through this webinar. I'm going to speak 20-25 minutes now before the Q&A on an update on the EU-UK trade negotiations. As always, I'm going to provide the only perspective I can have, which is a perspective from Brussels. Next slide, please. So today I will review first, before going into the negotiations themselves, I thought it would be useful to present to you what are the EU's priorities today, not connected with the Brexit question and the ongoing negotiations with the UK. Before looking at how those priorities affect Brexit and the expected outcome, then I will venture my guess of what to expect from those negotiations. I guess I can do no more than guess at this stage. And then before closing, I will also look at one example where the choice that is before the UK is the clearest, I think, in terms of what to do with its new regained trade autonomy, which is digital trade. It's not directly relevant to many of what you do, which is trading goods, but still it does touch trade in good. And it's also very interesting because it's an environment where the EU has a very strict approach, and there's an opportunity for the UK to move away from it. Next slide, please. So I don't know if you noticed, obviously you have not been able to travel as much as you want to the UK in the past few months. But in the past few months, the past, let's say 18 months, the EU has dramatically changed. And so the EU is no longer the EU that the UK decided to leave in 2016. It's a much more protectionist union, one which is keen on making sure that goods entering the market, the common markets, are goods which are not just complying with EU standards, that's of course a given, but also are made in ways which are compliant with EU standards, specifically on human rights and labor. There's a lot of activity by the EU institutions in the past months on these topics. And so the buzzword, that's my first bullet point here, is to restore the level playing field. There's a feeling, and none of this is directly connected to the UK, although the UK, being very large and very close, is on everyone's mind. Restoring the level playing field is not specific to the UK, and I would say that probably China was initially the main target there. A lot of the white papers, and I'm sure I struggle to keep up with them, so I'm sure that none of you, or very few of you, read those lengthy documents, but they are very important because all of them point in this direction. There should be ways to keep products out if they are made in ways which are not compliant with our rules. And there's an initiative from DG Justice where they are thinking of imposing a supply chain due diligence for compliance with human rights everywhere. That could be quite onerous and keep goods which are not compliant completely out of the EU. That's less a concern for the UK. On the environment, there is a push to impose a border carbon adjustment, which could become an issue for UK goods if the UK and the EU don't agree to connect the UK ETS with the EU ETS after the 1st of January. A lot of what the EU does today is also about protecting the integrity of the single market. You probably noticed that the international trade environment is a lot more unpredictable and hostile than it used to be. And the way the EU reacted to those changes, the fact that there is no appellate body in the WTO, a very aggressive trade policy by the United States, Brexit, and the rise of China, to name a few, has caused the EU to look a bit more inwardly and to try to focus more on its single markets. Some member states have a very protectionist streak, to name France, for instance. Germany used to be a bit more open to international trade and still is very open to international trade, but has moved a lot closer to the French position following the departure of the UK, so that we now have, and that's how I put it in the second bullet point, a dose of state support. So there is going to be the next generation EU budget, 750 billion euro borrowed over 30 years, borrowed now, reimbursed over 30 years, but spent in only a few years to support the economy. A pinch of industrial policy, that used to be a swear word in Brussels English. Industrial policy and the EU didn't match. It was something more akin to or that you would find in Beijing than in Brussels. Now it's everywhere. Strategic sectors have been identified, and those sectors will benefit from state support and protection of duties from so-called unfair competition from outside of the EU. And there is still a sprinkle of free trade because not all member states agree with the more protectionist instinct of the largest member states and have insisted to only keep out unfairly traded goods. And all the debate will be on what is unfair trade, of course. And that notion has evolved dramatically over the past years, and it's bound to evolve a lot more. Third bullet point, the EU is committed to be carbon-free by 2050 because it's necessary for protecting the coast. I mean, coastal cities. I mean, and fight against global warming. There's also an energy independence elements to this. The EU imports a lot of its energy, and if we move to renewable, we become more autonomous in our energy, less dependent on Russia, Middle East, America, the UK on our energy production. And there's also that's a useful tool to protect the EU market and impose measures, duties against imported goods which do not comply with our stringent rules. So all of this come together in a proposal for a carbon border adjustment. The Commission is now consulting with business and stakeholders until I think the end of this month, and will at the end of this year, beginning of next year, make a number of proposals. What we expect is to see a carbon border adjustment on pretty much anything that's imported ultimately, and not just on steel and raw materials, because if the EU were to stop its carbon border adjustment on those products, it would in a sense incentivize manufacturing of everything else outside of the EU, and that's definitely not on the agenda of the EU. So watch that spot. Don't think that the difficulties that bringing goods into the EU market will stop at custom duties and customs formalities. You are likely to see new type of duties being imposed at the border in the form of a carbon border adjustment. The EU is also keen on saving the, and I'm still on slide 7 for another minute, saving what can be saved from the WTO Paris Agreement. There's obviously a lot of challenges to the multilateral international order. And so the EU is engaging with like-minded countries. And there you could think of Korea, Japan, hopefully the UK tomorrow, Canada, and so on, to try to salvage the international discipline that the EU would like to continue. And last bullet point, which is here a lot closer to our discussion today, Brexit. The EU is also, of course, very concerned about peace in Ireland, and that is perceived as requiring the absence of a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And so the EU is obviously very keen about that. I put there a quote by Charles Michel. He's the head of the Council of the EU, so the group of the member states. And he said, not talking to the UK, was talking to China on the 14th of September. Europe wants to be a player and no longer a playing field. So there's this sense of increased urgency and needs to be, between inverted brackets, sovereign. So if the UK didn't like the EU in 2015 because it was too federalist, the EU is rapidly integrating further, and this will have an impact on the border. Quickly, the tools that the EU has in order to achieve this sovereignty, open strategic autonomy. Actually, I didn't mention the 3 words, but this is how it's coined now in Brussels since last week, when the member states finally agreed on where the EU should go. On this, it's the open strategic autonomy. That means keeping unfair products out and being less open than before. Duties obviously is one most effective way of keeping unfairly traded products out. The traditional trade remedies, anti-dumping, anti-subsidy are the main ones. There's the rebalancing, that's the retaliation duties that the EU did impose just once against the US when the US hit EU and other countries' steel. Now, the EU immediately retaliated with its own duties, and it's going to do it more and more in the future, in the time third countries do not comply with the EU's reading of what these countries are in its international obligation. There will be the carbon border adjustment. It will not be a duty in the strict form of the sense, probably the projection at the border of the emission trading scheme and the requirement to relinquish emission rights when placing goods on the EU market. And there are likely to be more safeguards measures, especially in the UK-EU context. If there is a free trade agreement, you will see in the next slide that the member states are calling on an automatic right for the EU to raise duties if the EU is perceived to have breached its obligations without having to resort to dispute settlement first. Supply chain due diligence, there's those of you following this file know that on the 1st of January, there will be a regulation requiring the placing of conflict minerals on the EU market to undergo mandatory supply chain due diligence. There's a new mandatory scheme coming for battery parts and raw materials, nickel and the like. And another one very likely for human rights compliance as well coming. And deforestation is, there's a lot of noise around that too. So we expect mandatory supply chains to happen there too. These are all now being discussed and debated, but there's not a lot of resistance against those. Subsidies is also a tool that the EU is going to use to achieve its open strategic autonomy. It has identified a number of strategic sectors. The last list I saw was the following: batteries, microelectronics, Internet of Things. That's 5G, hydrogen, and the space industry. That's Airbus in particular. Another tool is the screening of foreign investments. Probably less of an issue for UK investment there, but trying to keep Russian and Chinese money out, at least without conditions, when there's a risk to EU cohesion and sovereignty. Reciprocity accessing to public procurement. And last bullet point in the tools, Chief Trade Enforcement Officer. It's a new post created a few weeks ago. I think it's a few weeks ago, no more than 2 months. It's a very senior trade official in charge of supervising trade compliance, trade disputes, also the investment screening scheme. And one of the things that he's going to do is to revisit existing free trade agreements, for instance, with Korea, with Canada, and make sure that the third countries do comply with all of their obligations, in particular when it comes to labor standards and environment. And so the EU, what the EU is now thinking about is to revisit existing free trade agreements, which is an indication of the increased distaste for such agreements now in the EU. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for Brexit? There, it's an educated guess from Brussels. So don't quote me on this in 6 months when I've proved completely wrong. But this is our assessment of what this means in the Brexit, the EU UK free trade negotiations now. I think the priority of the EU is not fish, definitely not, but it's to prevent the UK from deregulating and be a non-allied European countries and a threat to the EU single market. And so I think the insistence on the EU to make sure that the UK standards remain equivalent to the EU's, and that there is no subsidization in the UK that is unduly distortive to the single market. This is all to keep the UK within the EU's orbit. And the EU will demand that in order to grant preferential access to the UK goods. Either the UK accepts or the UK doesn't accept. And if the UK doesn't accept, there's no agreement, and then the EU will just restrict access to the EU market for UK goods. A constant, what everyone is saying, and has been saying since the very beginning, is a member country that leaves the EU doesn't have the same access to the EU market. And the further away that former member state is to the EU in terms of rule and EU discipline, the more it should hurt. And so here the UK has decided to be out of the customs union, which is already quite far from where it used to be. And so trading with the EU will hurt in the form of duties and restriction to access to the EU market. In Northern Ireland, this is a specific issue there. The EU was very shocked. The member states were shocked by the internal market bill. Many people have hypotheses of why it happened. Maybe some of you are better informed than we are in Brussels, but we don't understand why that. No one in Brussels understands why that UK internal market bill was made. But the consequence is that there's a loss of trust, and the latest consequence of that loss of trust is that Michel Barnier last week and yesterday was called by the member states to request and obtain from the UK that if there is any issue in terms of compliance with the level playing field, so equivalent rules and no significant subsidies, if there is any issue, the EU does not have to wait for a dispute settlement resolution in order to raise duties. And so if there is an agreement, you should expect there to find safeguard clauses, the ability for the EU to quickly reimpose duties after its own internal investigation and subject this to dispute settlement later. So they will likely be, even if there's an agreement, there will likely be flashpoints of duties there based on trade tensions. And the last bullet point on the top part of the slide, the EU is no longer fond of FTAs. You should realize that. And so a lot of commentators complain or wonder why the EU is not offering to the UK something equivalent to the CETA, the agreement concluded with Canada. And the main reason for it, there are two reasons. The main reason is we are not in 2015 anymore. And the CETA almost failed to be ratified. Actually, it's not been fully ratified yet. And the second reason is obviously the UK is not Canada. The UK used to be a member state. It's very large and it's very close. And so granting free trade access to UK goods has a big cost for the EU. And the position of the EU today that cannot be done without regulatory alignments or equivalence, and the absence of distortive subsidization. And the WTO discipline is not enough. If the WTO subsidy discipline is what you comply with in order to have access to the EU market under non-preferential term. If you want to have access to preferential terms, they should be more disciplined. I also wanted to put some perspective on the money involved here, and that because it's important not to lose track of that. If you place yourself in the shoes of the EU member states, the 27, there was a time not so long ago, and actually it's still the case today, where the UK used to contribute around 13 billion euro a year to the functioning of the European Union. And the UK now is leaving this and leaving the price tag to the EU for the future, to the 27 for the future. And that plays a role. So that money will have to be paid somehow. I don't think there is a direct one-to-one connection there, but you need to realize that these 13 billion euro have been lost. On top of this, the COVID crisis now has created this the next generation EU borrowing by the European Union directly that needs to be repaid over the next 30 years. That's 25 billion euro a year. So the EU needs to find more money to finance this borrowing and the loss of the UK contribution. And so a lot of this will be levied at the border, not just against the UK, but also against the UK. Next slide, please. Deal or no deal, what's the difference? I say this because since the UK is not going to be in a customs union, there's a lot that has been lost already in terms of market access. Even if the UK were able to negotiate with the EU a very good free trade agreement, the fact that it's not in the customs union means that there will be declarations, there will be duties paid on at least part of the imports, possibly all of them. There will be delays, and that's on the trade distortion side. On the positive side, the UK is already party to the Transit Convention, so that will remain largely undisturbed. Now, what is the added value of a trade deal in this type of context, which will be one of reduced access to the EU market, whatever happens on the 31st of January, December 1st of January? Possibility of seeing some or all of the safety checks done in the UK recognized automatically in the EU. That will have a big impact on regulated goods. Think of the food industry or meat, for instance. There could be improved cooperation between the customs authorities with some access by HMRC to the UK systems. This could be on the table someday or not. We'll see what comes of the negotiations or in the future. The carbon border adjustment, having the UK ETS integrated into the EU ETS and a recognition mechanism in place there would protect UK-made goods from the border adjustment. Potentially, there could be preferential access, and I think that's one of the main objectives of the ongoing negotiations. We'll see whether that happens, but there I would I want to remind you that this is preferential access is only for originating products. Not all products are covered by preferences, and often the agricultural products are excluded. And that even for the products covered by free trade rules, by preferential origin rules, when you look at how much trade is actually benefiting from it, you're in most FTAs, you have 20 or 30% of trade, which does not take benefit of the preferences, either because of lack of skills or it's too costly for the benefits involved when duties is low. And an important point is the possibility of the free movement of data. I'll speak about that in the next slide. To me, the most important thing that a deal would bring is a continued or restored trust and a degree of stability. If there is no agreement, I think the relationship between the UK and the EU will be quite unstable for a while, and instability will bring duties probably. Yeah, we'll see what that brings. But a deal would definitely be good for the trust and stability of the relationship between the EU and the UK. What's next? So we were supposed to, the day after tomorrow was supposed to be the ultimate deadline. It's obviously no longer the ultimate deadline. On Thursday, the council is meeting and is going to discuss what should be the next steps. What we hear, what we read is that there must be an agreement between now and the end of the month of the beginning of November. Then the agreement will need to be ratified in Westminster and in Brussels and the 27 capitals, plus some sub-regional capitals, including in Belgium. And all this needs to happen before the end of the year. If it doesn't, there will be no deal. Should we expect any surprise? That is my parachute there. Should there be something I completely overlooked? No one is considering that there could be an extension of the current transition period beyond the end of the year. But we've been surprised before. If the momentum is very good and what's keeping the ratification is just the timing, who's to say that there couldn't be an exceptional extension until the end of March? Let's say it's not impossible, not likely at all, but not impossible. I just put there a few quotes of yesterday and Friday that by DFT and Politico. They interviewed some of the people in the room. And the first one is interesting. It's an EU diplomat, whomever that is. My feeling is that the summit on Thursday this week will make the position more strict. And the member states will say to Barnier, hold on, be careful. So you should not expect that the EU is going to make more compromise. I think the EU is hardening, and the compromises will have to be made by the UK in great part, except possibly on fisheries, where at the end of the day, it doesn't affect much trade. And the EU has been now demanding from the UK to keep the status quo. And I don't think that is really reasonable. The UK is out of the EU, should make a difference on fisheries, especially. So there might be a gesture on fisheries, but not on the rest. There was a lot of positive noises and commentaries coming from London last week on where the negotiations are, and the officials interviewed by Politico are extremely harsh. Just reading the second one, there's clearly a spin that the UK wants to get out there. The deal is within reach, only fish is still a problem. That's complete nonsense, as a deal on none of the EU's red line is nowhere in sight at this stage. So holding our breath, but a no deal scenario is still very much possible. So that's all I had to say on the EU-UK negotiations. I will spend now a few minutes, next slide please, on an interesting topic where actually the UK leaving the EU does give interesting freedom to the UK that could benefit significantly its economy, in my view. So first, why leave the EU? Obviously, it's to be autonomous from the EU. and to move away from the EU's rules and rulemaking. You may know that one of the areas where the EU is the strictest is on the processing of personal data and the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. The EU is very strict there, and case law of the Court of Justice in the past years has reinforced how strict those rights have to be respected, how strictly those rights have to be respected. I think it's fair to say that there are two main models to follow there on what to do with digital trade. There is the EU, the GDPR, and the protection of privacy as a fundamental right, and what I call the Silicon Valley approach, which is a more laissez-faire, but maybe less protective of privacy and of personal data, but which brought about a fantastic digital industry, which is now really, dominating the world with the exception of China. I noted a very interesting development. A month ago or so, the UK and Japan struck an agreement on a new FTA. There is there an ambitious data and digital trade chapter, which was very interesting because it means the UK is feeling that it has more freedom than it used to have as a UK member state. That's not surprising because data is so controlled. Personal data is so controlled in the EU that the EU is extremely reluctant to negotiate with third countries about the processing of personal data. So that was a change in the UK-Japan FTA. It was also presented as a stepping stone for the UK to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, renamed Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, when it was concluded with the US when Trump became president of the United States. So that's where the UK has its wants to go. And there, the data chapter of the TPP was made with Silicon Valley in mind. So going down that route could be definitely for the UK opting for a more laissez-faire approach. And the more this approach seems to be increasingly incompatible with remaining within the EU's sphere of influence on data. And there were cases on the 6th of October, so that's a week ago, two cases. One of them concerned Belgium and France, and the other one, the cases references there concerned the UK, where the Court of Justice, and these were cases that started before Brexit, the Court of Justice found that the surveillance laws of France, Belgium, and the UK are not compatible with the treaty and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU. So the direct consequence of this is that it's no longer possible for the European Commission to recognize EU laws, UK laws, as providing adequate protection to EU data. And so that will, unless the UK changes its laws in line with what the Court of Justice says, and I don't think this is what the UK likes to do these days, unless the UK does that, there will be no equivalence probably. And so that will be at the expense of movement of data between the UK and the EU. And so this is a very interesting example of the fork in the road that there is in the UK right now, hurting the relationship with the EU to create something else. And this is what I wanted to present to you. I think I'm almost within the time allocated to me. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Yves. Yeah, there are a couple of questions. You always provoke questions. First one is, did I hear correctly? The EU will subsidize industry, but bring in punitive duties for industry subsidized by other countries. Where does this fit into WTO?
So the WTO obviously is important for the EU, but to a point. You have two categories of countries. You have those countries which are aligned with the EU and have accepted to subject themselves to an alternative dispute settlement mechanism in the WTO. So that if there's a difference between the EU and the third country, there is still an appeal mechanism. For all the other countries, the EU basically is less concerned. On the intensity of the discipline, the EU believes, by default, the view of the EU is that it does comply with the WTO discipline. That's obviously not the case, otherwise it would not lose cases like the Airbus Boeing case. But the default position is my subsidy is compatible with the WTO ASCM, so the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. And with the UK, what I expect the EU to do is, from this position, this assumption that we comply until proven otherwise, which is, by the way, how the WTO works. You're right until you lose in the appellate body. And until then, it's your view, it's their view. And as long as there's no appellate body, your subsidy is fine. For those countries that don't accept to be subject to the ad hoc appellate body created by the EU and a few other countries. And so what the EU is likely to expect from the UK is a discipline similar to its own. And there it's a good point, because the EU is relaxing its discipline now on state aid. And these 750 billion euro that are going to be invested in the EU in the next few years. I was reading the figures for Italy. Apparently it's more than the Marshall Plan for Italy. So it's huge amounts of money. And that obviously will create distortions, possibly many of them not compatible with the WTO. But what will matter for the EU at first will be that this does comply with the new relaxed state aid discipline that the EU accept for itself, which it will likely require the UK to accept for itself too, if the UK wants to retain the same access to the EU markets.
Thank you. Next question is, you make a big point about the UK's reduced access to EU markets, but you seem to be ignoring the EU's market access will also be similarly reduced. Do you know where the balance in trade lies? And if you do, could you please share these figures with us?
No, I don't know the exact figures. Where I left it, the last time I looked at it, is the UK market is important, but a lot less so important to the EU at large than the other way around. The UK was more important for the EU for its supply chains, like the automotive supply chain, and the ability, a lot of investments were made in the UK with the idea of bringing parts into the German car manufacturing system and the various European plants here and there. That is more harmful probably to EU interest. Losing access to that is more harmful to the EU's interest, but now it's been, 4 years, 4.5 years since the Brexit vote, so a lot of those costs have been integrated. And so yes, the UK market is important, retaining access to the UK market is important, but it's less important to the EU and for the UK. Also, don't forget that the UK, and that's why the UK doesn't manage to engage with Canada on the negotiation of a free trade agreement, is the idea, at least at first, is to reduce duties across the board, to keep goods coming into the UK. That will benefit UK companies as well, at least at first. And even considering the harm that this will obviously cause. I mean, the country leaving the EU is by definition a loss of market access for the 27 to the UK and the UK to the 27. That's what leaving the EU means. And so once you agree that this is what Brexit is about, or any country leaving the EU is about, it's reduced market access, you just need to factor this in and move on. And I think from very early on, this is what the member states decided to do. It took more time for the EU industry to follow, but not that much more time when you listen to what the BDI, the German Federation of Industries, is saying. For them, what is really precious is the single market. They were concerned about the survival of the single market at first. And so protecting it is the priority, and get whatever access can be got from the UK, but not at the expense of endangering or threatening or undermining the EU's market. And the UK is not isolated there. You need to remember the world we live in. China's there, the US there, and both of them very aggressive, try to divide the EU member states, so far without success. And whatever solution is devised for the UK is a solution that will be devised for the other countries as well. So protecting the integrity of the single market, and it's the new open strategic autonomy, which is really now on everybody's mind.
Thank you. A couple more questions. I think someone's trying to answer, you asked the question about internal market bill and why. I think maybe this question is trying to answer that. The EU is free to act in a bad faith in the Northern Ireland Joint Committee on any issue. Why are you surprised that the UK is seeking national powers to take necessary action?
I'm not surprised at all. I'm just repeating what I hear in Brussels. I'm surprised that the UK accepted that solution in the first place. Because if you look at the Northern Ireland Protocol, okay, it's written there, you know, the Northern Ireland remains in the customs union. The sophisticated audience on this webinar knows that in practice, it's unclear on which side the Northern Ireland is. It's probably a hybrid and maybe a bit closer to the EU actually than the UK. And so I was surprised that the UK, especially under the new Prime Minister, accepted this in the first place. Now, I'm still surprised that having accepted this and signed the agreement last year, to go back and somehow withdraw what was given, breaching international law, that is something personally I did not expect, because it does create a lot of breach of trust. I mean, why even bother conclude more agreements? We need those agreements for the future. And if we don't know how the UK is going to comply with them, it creates a major disincentive to pursue negotiations. So that's I think the shock that came in Brussels. They hoped that this was behind and that somehow we were building on this. And it looks like we are not. If indeed the idea was to, if the UK bill is the final say, or if it was a part of the negotiations and somehow it won't be applied the way it is, that might make sense, but that's just what I mean. And also, so believe me when I tell you, everyone in Brussels is massively shocked by this. And it has an impact on what is going to be offered in the next 2-3 weeks of the negotiation to the UK. And the calls for these safeguards and possibility to levy duties and retaliate immediately without waiting for dispute settlement is something that you're going to read about in the next weeks.
Yeah, I suppose very interesting. If it was just a negotiating tool, it seemed to work. I've never seen senior officials jump onto the Eurostar so quickly. So I suppose time will tell. Next question is, can I ask Yves how he envisages the certification process to look for a free trade agreement between the UK and the EU? If it is agreed before, the end of the year, could it be similar to the REX system for Canada, or would a registration be needed to be implemented in advance?
I don't know. I see that the REX system, the Commission loves the REX system because it places all the liability for the payment of the duty on the importer, whereas before under the form system, your one or your med or Form A's, there was still a possibility to argue good faith. Which REX, it's gone. And so I think the DG Tax, DG Budget, so the people who are there to collect the money, are probably going to ask for REX. Plus REX is being sold as something that is simple, which isn't. It is very simple to register and to certify under REX. It's just very risky. And so I think REX is probably the default option. But I have no idea what's the state of the discussion between the EU and the UK on this point. I would expect REX personally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And just because we're running out of time, I think let's make this the last question. Anything else that comes up, Yves, we'll obviously sort of put through to you and hope you'll answer so we can post that on the website. But final question, what is the benefit of the EU abandoning its genetic engineering / modification industry?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I understand the question. Genetic engineering modification.
I also do not understand the question.
I think that anyone in the Commission would say, we don't abandon anything. We are on top of all the cutting edge technologies. I don't know. I'm not sure I understand the question. The EU is keen, with the exception of data, where we are in a more difficult position because of the Court of Justice hardline approach to the protection of personal data. Apart from that, the EU is very keen to regain leadership in strategic sectors, and that includes, let me check the sectors again. That includes batteries, definitely for the car industry, electronics, 5G, hydrogen, and space. These were the ones specifically identified by the member states a few weeks ago.
Well, I think that's it, Yves. I mean, thank you very, very much. As usual, thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I'm sorry that we do not have the opportunity to have a glass of wine or a beer after this one, but let's hope next time round we are actually sort of meeting in person somewhere in London again. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
A big thank you to all our speakers and attendees today. I mean, often throughout the Brexit process, we are left with more questions than answers. Today, I think we got some answers. Some might not have been the answers we wanted, but at least we can, continue with a bit of our planning and preparations. We as ACITA, your management committee, are in the process of planning a further virtual event in the next few weeks, and we'll continue to react to whatever happens in the industry. And I would appreciate any feedback you have. What did we do well? What could we have done better? And what subjects would you like covered before the end of the year? I hope that you found this useful, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. So thank you very much and goodbye.